And we're off. A slight smidgen late as we sorted a few things at this end, but we should be good to go. That being the case, if you were out there watching live, you could drop a quick comment saying something like, I can hear you, everything is okay. That would be great, because we have had those terrible once in a million instances in the past where it just didn't stream out properly.
Yeah, hope everyone's having a good day out there. It looks like, okay, I see Twitch being like, yes. Just looking for YouTube to say the yes. Quick comment. Excellent. Thank you. Very, very good. It's lovely to see you all. We're so close to getting through. Every time we come on to stream, I just look how close we are to August ending and just go just a little further. Just a little further.
You feel any heat at your end?
Yeah. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it.
Yeah, it's for Scotland, it's unreasonably warm just now, but I'm living in my lovely little air-conditioned office, so I barely feel it at all. So today's going to be a good one, and much like the discussion topic of the day, we don't like the heat, and neither do the dragons. The dragons just don't like it heating up the way that the old ones, and of course the lizardmen, really did. And that's going to be one of the very many points of conversation that we're going to be discussing today.
Yeah, I never thought that I would have like a hardcore sympathy towards dragons, but like, you know, that idea of someone younger moves in and they start just turning up the thermostat and you're like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Stop!
I'm not enjoying this in the slightest. I'm going underground because screw this for a laugh. So as we wait for everybody to gather up, why don't we dive into a couple of the lovely old super chats to say our few opening messages.
Veritas, I have yet to make a dragon character for AOS or Warhammer Fantasy. Feels like a damn shame. Can't wait to hear y'all's insight so I can get to cooking.
Yeah, you missed the first comment there. It may not be on your side. Yeah, I'll go grab it in just a second after this one.
Yeah, I don't have it on my side.
Yeah, it's not on your side. Where were we? Yeah, this is going to be a fun one, I think, because dragons as an overall subject are often just conflated into one subject, one core idea, and that is dragons and Warhammer Dragons, right? And I think we're going to slightly deconstruct that because there are several different types of dragon beyond the normal black, red, Incardine, whatever else you might want to go for. There's more than one, let's say, it's not just breed, it's just different types of dragon in the Warhammer world.
Yeah, and I will say that your comment makes me laugh because I'll never forget when AOS released, oh god, I don't remember exactly which book it was, where they were like, hey, you want to play like the full-size giant dragon mini? You can! And I was like, oh, okay. But AOS is a very different beast from Warhammer Fantasy, where that would be obscenely ridiculous, though, yeah.
I mean, would it? Let's bring up the first comment that got lost there. Magladroth, do dragons have gods? If so, do they predate the other gods since dragons are much older than the arrival of the old ones, or do they not bow to anyone? Actually, I think in this particular instance, the Cathayans provide a pretty damn good model. And the answer here is, as far as we're aware, not only do they not have gods, they are, broadly speaking, against the idea of etheric intervention. And the etheric intervention appears to be something that we will be discussing to a degree through the course of this stream, because it seems to be something that has not only influenced the dragons, it's changed them.
Yeah, this is actually fairly consistent with older stuff as well, where even where you have, like a good example is like the Forest Dragons have this whole thing where they like to have little debates with various wood elves about whether certain protections or concepts come from like the father of the dragons or from like one of the gods, and they kind of have a fun back and forth about it, but they don't have a god of the dragons. It's just their primordial ancestor. Yep. Which they treat as probably a much more which, I mean, to the elves there's probably not really that much of a difference, but to the dragons they would probably say there is a very emphatic difference.
Pretty big one. Yeah.
Ricky Chapman, can a dragon learn any lore of magic?
That's a little bit like saying, can a human learn any lore of magic? And the answer to that is, yeah, sure, but there's also restrictions. Humans, for example, can if we go with the standard model, not really channel more than one under most normal circumstances. Dragons, somewhat similarly, appear to be somewhat stuck along the winds that they're most associated with. Having said that, though, there are always going to be examples that completely contradict this. The ability to mix magic with dragons is something that Warhammer Fantasy Battle long discussed but often avoided, and there's a reason. The reason is game balance. If you actually gave the dragons all the rules that they should have, they would be unstoppable forces on the tabletop, costing possibly thousands of points, equaling armies in and of themselves, rather than being something that went along with your army. Effectively, you're going to turn up with a dragon and say, that's my army, spray painted it last night with my airbrush, sorted. And everyone looks at their like 10,000 miniatures they've been painting over the last 2 years and go, this seems freaking unfair. This is just not right. But if they did dragons properly, that's probably what would happen. But it's very much not the case. So the answer is yes, they can. They can do a variety of different spells and magic, and some are more capable and less capable, but they're often trammeled down one line or another depending on the type of dragon they are.
Yep, and Andy's completely correct on that, because the 8th edition was when GW finally went, fuck it, and released books where you could bring well over 1,000 point dragon models that have a lot of spells. So we just kind of like hit that point eventually. Captain Magma, any plans to look at that new mod for Warhammer 3 about the hung chaos tribe of people? I did not know that was a thing until just this millisecond. So I will put that. I'm actually quite curious about that. I'm a little trepidatious about it, but I'm also quite curious. So I will look into that, but I haven't yet because I just have been made aware of it. Persio1512. Hello guys, longtime follower here. An off-topic question. I've seen the Afterlife stream, and I'm left without understanding what actually does necromancy do to souls when resurrecting an ancient wight.
You know, you're not the only one who is confused, Persio. The writers behind it also are, because you'll find that some writers will claim, hey, no, it's not the soul. Others will claim, yes, it is. And there's a reason that you're left uncertain. It's because the text that we have for wights stands in direct contradiction to much of the lower background that you get out there. For example, with Liber Necris to a degree, which even tackled the wights directly and still sort of skirted around the subject.
Yeah, I think towards the end of the stream, we kind of go into a whole thing about like there are two very distinct ways that necromancy could and should theoretically work that are very different from one another. And when you get to wights, that's kind of where you have to sort of pick a team or come up with your own theories. But it's you're going to run into, you're going to have to smooth over edges. I don't think you're going to find like a super clean, like easy answer per se. You're going to have to do some massaging no matter where you end up.
I mean, strictly speaking here, that we are looking for something that controls the wights rather than summons up the wights. Which would be a better way of viewing what the necromancy is doing. Because this is not one where their souls are brought back in and all the rest, because wights are a slightly different kettle of fish.
Firesnake, wish I was there for Wednesday to put Zinch in every tier. Wednesday was such an experience. If you haven't had the pleasure to go check out the Wednesday stream, I would encourage it because it was very unhinged. Like people saw chaos in the title and were like, I take that as a challenge.
Let's go mad. For those of you, how much did we make? We made approximately 1/4 of my dental bill, which was astonishing to my wife, who the next day went, what? And that's after YouTube took their cut, which was surprisingly and disturbingly high. But after YouTube's cut, we've covered 1/4 of my dental bill. I was literally dancing a jig the next day. Well, 2 days later, because it takes about that long for YouTube to catch up with how much money has come in. But by the end of it, 1/4 of my dental bill, that is a good time as far as I'm concerned.
Yep. So thank you again to everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone that came in. It was amazing.
Dynamman, I have a headcanon regarding the Dragons of Kosun, which has been very recently named, which is the Warhammer Korea. In Korean mythology, dragons start out as snake-like creatures called imugi before eventually maturing into fully fledged dragons. I would keep this and also have it so the dragons coexist with humans. Neither the dragons or humans really rule the other. They just have an alliance and live in different areas of the same land. This is part of how Koshin has managed to fend off chaos. And there's a second part somewhere.
I didn't see the second part.
There
I've
it
just
is.
found out.
However, when the old ones came, most of these dragons decided to hide away from them in their mountain holds. However, one of their number, their greatest warrior and their crown prince, decided to explore the world instead, defying his father's orders. That crown prince has never returned, though the dragons of Kolsun know he is still alive and strangely have an aversion to the Cathayan dragons. That's a lot.
It is indeed, and we've only got 3 more minutes before we dive into our intro, so be aware of that. We will be cutting off our super chats at that point. We'll go back to them after our introduction.
Yep. To the whole thing, I will say that the trickiest part about doing that one would be that you're working with the idea of humans before the arrival of the old ones, which would change pretty dramatically how we understand the relationship. So that part would need to be kind of tinkered with, but you got some fun ideas for cooking around there.
Sure, it's not bad.
Singemeister, lore reasons for dragons becoming snub-nosed in AOS. Modeling technology
Miniature
change.
designers.
Yeah. Many, yeah, they just changed how they make minis.
Yep.
Giri Girionison. What's the connection between Isabel von Karstein, alias Elizabeth Bathory, and the von Drax/Dragons? Hungarian connection.
Yeah, at best, it's nothing more. The Von Drax are nothing more than a reference to Vlad the Dracul. It is that weak and that simple. It's a reference to the dragons, the Order of the Dragon from ancient history. It is not a reference to the Drakvald or from any of the old Thuringian tribes that used to be associated with dragons back in the day over in the old world. So loosely speaking, it's nothing more than a name. Now, does that mean that backgrounds couldn't be expanded upon in future? Absolutely not. They could definitely be expanded upon in future. Some writer may indeed do so, but as it currently stands, there is no greater story to it other than the province is called Drac.
Mm-hmm. All right, we can grab like just a couple more here real quick.
That
guy, I asked Sotek the other day, so I'll ask this for Andy. if dwarves use one rag, how many would chaos dwarfs use? I don't know.
What's the reference here?
So there's the dwarfs in Total War. When you click on them, sometimes they'll say something where they go one rag, and it's like there's
one rag. Ah, right. Okay, so they're speaking.
So it was like one rag.
Right, got you. So how many would chaos dwarfs? 8.
There you go.
Frogs.
All right. Do we want to hop into the intro and then come back to the rest?
Maybe one more. We're just about a quarter past mark.
Sure. Warmonger. Hey, Lorebeards. Greetings from the Southern Chaos Waste.
Hey,
again.
Warmonger.
The stream was very eagerly anticipated. Now, which do you think is the coolest dragon kind, and why is it the Warp Fire Dragons?
Okay, so to answer this, we're going to have to discuss all the dragon kinds, but we're going to be doing that during the course of the stream. So how about, Warmonger, we do this a little bit later when we go through all the different types of dragons, because there's a lot of them, and quite a few of them are worthy of a little bit more discussion, because some of them have got more background than some of the others. Some of them are literally just a single reference in a single book, and we're done. Others have been used across multiple editions in a variety of ways.
Yeah, so stay tuned, because we'll get into
that one, I reckon. Yeah. I think so. Right, will we dive into an intro?
Yeah, I think now is a great time.
I think now's a great time. Okay, so dragons in the old world. What does that mean? Why not dragons of Ulthuan? Why not Cathayan dragons? What? In fact, that's the answer already, because there's different types of dragon in the Warhammer world, and these different types manifest in different ways. And we are today focusing upon the dragons that you find largely populating the old world area of Warhammer. So that is all of the Empire, the World's Edge Mountains, down towards the Southlands in the south, up towards Norska in the north, and to a degree even the realm of chaos, and where it all grows a bit weird. We will also be diving right down into the very south, where, appropriately enough for our previous question, there are some dragons down there too, and they're not necessarily in the best shape. But we'll get to that a little bitty later. Dragons, however, as a concept, have been a part of the Warhammer world right from the very beginning, because dragons are synonymous with fantasy as a concept and an idea. Whenever someone says, hey, I'm playing a fantasy game, there's a few basic tropes that come to mind. Dragons, elves, dwarves, you get the idea. Now, a lot of these basic tropes are because of what popularized fantasy that we know today. And one of the great popularizers of Fantasia genre was J.R.R. Tolkien. And as we all know, The Hobbit had a gigantic dragon as its core antagonist. And that dragon antagonist is something that Warhammer pretty much took to heart, particularly in the early days. From Warhammer 1st edition through to 3rd edition, dragons were always there. And one of the core reasons for this is because Citadel Miniatures, which was the separate company to Games Workshop to begin with, until eventually it took over Games Workshop. In many respects, Games Workshop is actually Citadel Miniatures. Citadel Miniatures took over, and all of their miniatures got rules, obviously, for the Warhammer game, and continued to supply more dragons over the course of the years. So in the 80s, we got somewhere in the region of, I'm just going to make a random cast-off number, but about 40, 50 different dragon models. Some of them are really small, and I do mean really small. They're like tiny little dragonlings, often described as young dragons or dragon babies or minor spine dragons, of which I painted far too many of. Lovely little models, which were not more than around about an inch or two, so about 3-4 centimeters in length, and easy to paint up, and not much bigger than your standard Citadel miniature. However, a bunch of box sets came out as well. And it's during the course of the box sets that we begin to get our first real in-depth, let's say, lore background for dragons, particularly when we move to box sets like the Great Imperial Dragon. The Great Imperial Dragon was a pretty big dragon by metal standards. You had to paint that bad boy, and it was big. I say big because, bluntly, it was heavy, because it was made of a lead alloy that was super, super heavy. I remember painting my first Mordax, the Great Emperor Dragon, some time ago. And it's there that we get our first lore dump. Mordax, what the heck? What's this? Through the course of the 3rd edition of Warhammer, a bunch of box sets were released and a bunch of dragons were released that got their own lore. They were generally named because all miniatures back in that era got a name. And it might just simply be Mordax, or it might be, anything. I mean, Thrud the Barbarian had a name, but obviously every single miniature got its own little Scrag, or Baltho, or whatever they called it. Oh, look, here comes that individual miniature as part of the little catalog sheets at the back of the books. And each one of the dragons, because they came in box sets, came with their own little stories. Now, some of these stories were proper lore dumps, like Mordax, who was birthing many a Chaos Dragon that had to be hunted down. Others, however, were nothing more than little stories, a little aside, because many of the original Dragon boxes came along with a miniature, a fighter that was fighting a sorceress that had beguiled it, or the Dragon Master set, which were basically just a Melnibonian dragon with a Melnibonian on top from Michael Moorcock's books. Indeed, a lot of the early dragon mythology was strongly influenced by Michael Moorcock in particular, which might surprise many of you out there who think, well, clearly it's going to be Tolkien. Yeah, no. Because those conical helms, those pointy-helmed Melnibonians with dragon helms upon them became the core point of what became the High Elves and the Dark Elves, which is why they all have big pointy helmets. It's not because somebody thought that was a cool idea for Warhammer Elves. It's because they copy-pasted it over from Michael Moorcock's books. And elves and dragons became synonymously linked. They were pretty much from book to book to book in these early days put together. And this is something that we'll almost certainly later pick up when we move on to our Ulthuani dragons and where they come from, because that's where their roots become. However, if we look at all the rest of them, they were all given relatively similar names as the studio went through Axes and X's and Lermorxes and Malbothraxes and similar style of sounds, as it was clear these dragons had their own culture, their own ancient history, and they were quite separate to the other dragons that the elves were often associated, which all had elven-sounding names, Iliels and Felials and Milials, or whatever it might be, in Draugnirs as it would come later as we moved into 4th edition. As we hit 4th edition, the lore fragments, as is often the case. Now, we've discussed Warhammer Fantasy Battle 4th edition in like 3/4 of our streams, because it is the edition where the Warhammer world, as you know it today, is consolidated and turned into what we know today. Its first iteration, the 4th edition of the game, is a little bit loosey-goosey, but it gets consolidated into 5th and 6th editions until it's very clearly the Warhammer world we know today. Dragons are incorporated in the 4th edition in 2 ways. Way number 1 is as a mount, and that was, you might be surprised to hear, open to pretty much all armies, all of them. During this edition, it wasn't just an elf thing that happened and, oh shit, we better make sure we leave the option that we had in the 4th edition army for anyone in the Empire to do it with, living maybe an Imperial Dragon, because we've got an Imperial Dragon. Oh, Carfax the Red Dragon! Carfax is cool! That they kept. But broadly speaking, in this edition, almost everyone could ride a dragon. As we move into the 5th and 6th edition, as game balance becomes more of a thing and theming of the armies become more of a thing, the elves take control of the dragons. And they take control using a single word that was dropped very cleanly in the 4th edition of the game, Dragon Tamer. We'll discuss that in a different stream. Because as we move back to the dragons of the old world, this doesn't occur. The dragons are these wild entities that move around, and the only way that you can truly get them into your army is to potentially use magic to control them, because they're these great gigantic beasts that the wind of beasts might be able to control, possibly, maybe somehow. Or alternatively, they are something you make a deal with and you could possibly ride, or was tamed since birth because it was hatched from a particular egg, or something similar. And that's it. During this age, so we're talking Warhammer 4th up to Warhammer 8th, we get a lot of details about dragons from the old world. And these details are based upon what came before in Citadel Miniatures and also were built upon. So what came before in Citadel Miniatures was, as I said, an enormous number of different types of dragons, where they were green, red, gold, blue, purple, whatever it might be. And they got re-described and re-pitched as you move through the editions of Warhammer. So the Wood Elves got their green forest dragons. That makes sense, right? Blue lightning dragons, they exist, right? And slowly but surely, more and more different dragon types were added as they moved into an Incarmine dragon. That makes sense. Let's have one of those. Maybe a dragon of death. Yeah, one of those too, as they all got added. And all of them were, to almost no exception, the enemies of the dwarfs, which is a super fun little detail, which is never truly explained or detailed in any way beyond the fact that dragons live down beneath mountains, and so do dwarfs, thus we fight! And in a great game of Street Fighter 2 beneath the mountains, and I'm going with Street Fighter 2 because that's the Street Fighter I played as a kid. Street Fighter 2 beneath the mountains, they just fight. And why do they fight? Because one important detail from the early description of the dragons gets ported into the later descriptions. The early descriptions of dragons almost always included something like, and there's a great pile of gold upon which they lie. Oh, yes, ha, ha, ha. Just like Smaug from Tolkien. Ha, ha, ha. Yes, and the dwarves love that shit. They want to take their gold. Yeah! It's basically a giant adventure. But as they do the later versions, they always keep this idea of a dragon horde. It's a classic fantasy staple, and many of the writers like it, so they just repitched it. And some later writers tried to make some sense of that, as they went, well, if a dragon is sleeping on this giant pile of shit, why? What are they getting from it? And they sort of loosely answer it with a very loose, well, gold attracts Shabon, right? The gold wind of magic. So what they're doing is they're basking in this magic and they're holding it. And this idea starts to significantly transform how each one of the dragons gets pitched as we move from the 4th to the 8th edition. No longer are the color of dragons just simply the type of breath they have, which is effectively what they originally were, whether it was a black dragon and its great poisonous smoky breath, or a red dragon and its fire, a blue dragon and its lightning, an icy dragon and its icy breath. Now they were getting associated directly with winds of magic. And a red dragon was filled through with actually and capable of soaring on the heights of the actually wind. One of the reasons that this great bulk could be lifted up into the air far beyond the realms of standard physics. And they began to answer it in the Warhammer world with the winds of magic. And the dragons, when they basked in a wind, got changed by it. And this is something that becomes a almost standard core behind the scenes thinking for every dragon that gets written from around about 6th edition onwards, where it's always, and they have basked in this wind, or they are associated with this wind, or this wind runs through them, meaning that we end up with what is effectively a Shyish dragon, or an Azir dragon, or an Actui dragon, which comes with its own standard name. So a Shyish one, a Dragon of Death, or a Carmine Dragon. Or alternatively, the Azir one is just a Blue Dragon or a Thunder Dragon. Or we move over towards, what did I say? Actually, that's going to be your Red Dragon or your Fire Dragons. And they're given both of their names almost interchangeably, depending on who's doing the writing. So the dragons start being associated with Winds of Magic as we eventually arrive at not quite the end times, but more the times where 8th edition is going through its big peaks and changes where they're adding new rules to Warhammer, particularly with books like the Monstrous Arcanum or alternatively the Storm of Magic book, where they take a look at the concept of big dragons being controlled by magic and different types of big dragon that you might encounter. And I think that's where I'm going to loosely end my introduction is, not only do we have different types of dragon that are, in most modern iterations, actually attached to one of the Winds of Magic, even when it's not an official Winds of Magic. And by that, I'm looking at Ice Magic and the Ice Dragons. Because Ice Magic exists, so do Ice Dragons, and they're conflated together. Kislev uses them. Oh, but there's no Ice Wind! No, because there's only 8 winds! As they suddenly backpedal quickly, realizing that they've accidentally caught themselves into a magical loophole. But each one of the dragons is associated with the wind, but there's one other thing that each one of the dragons also has as a standard characteristic, and that's size. Because dragons come in a variety of sizes. Now, if we go to the Ulthwani dragons, they've got their own special little table for how big they are, involving star dragons, and we don't need to go into that because we'll do that with another one. But when it comes to the standard dragons, they are basically left out with dragonlings right at the bottom, all the way up to the top with an emperor dragon, which is probably where we're going to start when we actually dive into the subject, which is where do the dragons come from and how old are they in the Warhammer world? Because as the background for the Warhammer world got developed, they added a very core detail, which was the bigger the dragon is, the older it is. It's pretty simple. You don't get a dragon that's born of a big dragon that turns automatically into growing over the course of maybe 50 years to a full-size dragon. No, quite the opposite. What happens is they are born, and as they age over the course of, to begin with, the decades to centuries, they grow in size. And the vast majority of the original dragons are dead. The true emperor dragons, the gigantic ones, the ones that are so enormous that their heads are several times bigger than a standard man. They're just truly great creatures. But most of the dragons are all of a size, approximately 10 to 30 meters in length, basically a Warhammer miniature. Most of them are Warhammer miniature-sized dragons, but there are some that would make a Warhammer miniature look absolutely tiny. And these are the great emperor dragons that come from almost the beginning of time, which we are going to be discussing. But that doesn't work for the Warhammer battlefield, nor does it look great for a lot of art, where often they're trying to make the characters that they are describing front and center. And that character might not be more than a couple of meters high, 6 foot high or so. And a giant dragon that's maybe 100 meters long or something doesn't make a good riding model. And here we have something that we will be discussing later, which is that the dragons of Warhammer are much, much bigger than they're ever depicted. But they're also described as being thoroughly rideable in a way that doesn't make sense when you actually see it in practice. But we'll get to that. So loosely, we are going to be discussing today the dragons of the old world, not what happened to the Ulthwani dragons, not the Cathayan dragons. We're going to be discussing the dragons, where they come from, what happens to a dragon as it ages, some famous example of dragons, lots of different types of dragon, because there's a lot, and loosely how dragons are represented in the game and what they both get right and what they, and I say this with a really heavy amount of trepidation, what they get in heavy quotation marks as wrong, as in where do they make contradictions and why? Because some of the contradictions are completely understandable. You can see why they're doing it, but it does mean that we end up with a background that is inconsistent in several places. There we go, 15 minutes on the ball. Spotted.
Excellent.
Oh yeah.
Well done.
Oh yeah.
All right, so let's carry on with some super chat stuff, and then we'll get on into it.
Yeah, that's good.
Charles, if dragons were anti-etheric in nature, is it possible that the most ancient dragons can use the magic of reality, as in non-warp magic, the way 40K's Necrons or Satan can, like they're demons of reality?
So, Charles, that is an interesting argument to make. But the important word out of your comment here is possible. And the answer is, yeah, it's possible. Is it what I would do? I mean, I don't think so. But I could definitely do it for a version. One of the great joys of playing the roleplay game, for example, is whenever you start a new campaign, is that you can tell a completely different story with a completely different set of background established rules. And I see no reason why that couldn't be the case for one game.
Yeah, we haven't seen such a beast pop up, but it wouldn't be the most shocking thing we've seen happen. So it's like, yeah, sure, why not? Chris, what are your boys' favorite dragons from pop culture / literature / folklore / what have you? What's our favorite dragon?
So I am partial, as most people are, to the ones that we encounter when we're kids. We often carry the initial exposure that we have to pop media of various types into our adult lives. And I was exposed to Michael Moorcock books as a kid. Flame Fang and the great gouts of poison that he would throw down that burst into flame was just freaking awesome to me as a kid because it presented dragons in a slightly different way. And the relationship between the dragons...
They stole Flame Fang from Michael Moorcock?
Yeah, they steal everything from Michael Moorcock.
GW, guys, come on!
Yeah, but early Games Workshop were just gigantic thieves. We know this. They just took stuff they liked and they ported it into their game without too much thought. And then later on, it got big, and they were left with those early decisions. But anyway, yeah, for me, it's hard not to get past Melnibonian dragons because they were my first exposure to a dragon that was slightly different to the Arthurian dragon that we all know and love, which is basically the giant flying lizard that threw fire from its mouth.
Yeah, for me, the dragons that I loved the most as a kid, because like Andy was talking about, they were like kind of my first big exposure as like not just being like a tiny child, but like kind of a teenager-ish and preteen, was the dragons actually from the Reign of Fire series.
Yeah, Reign of Fire is cool.
Yeah, so the Reign of Fire movie and the video game was amazing. It had such a good game on the Nintendo GameCube. I played the hell out of that game. Especially because when you're playing it as a kid, you're like, oh, I'm playing the humans. And then you do a certain mission and it goes, congrats, you've unlocked the dragon campaign. And you get to play a dragon. It's fucking awesome. It's such a good game. Those dragons were fantastic and were surprisingly well designed. Like the CGI holds up really well, which is pretty incredible. Aaron, any non-dragon managed to bard? I assume by bard you mean like bang, or meant to say bang and said bard on accident. A non-Cathayan dragon.
The answer to this is not inside the established lore, but there's no reason not to happen. And if you want to see this directly in action, go watch the most recent episode of Lorehammer.
Yeah, that would not surprise me in the slightest, is what I'll say to that.
Yeah, Lorehammer had a thing that happened just last Friday that was crazy.
There's a way.
Yeah, quite.
Cole Patterson. So what makes what makes a dragon in Warhammer? Are wyverns related to dragons? Are drakes or worms different from dragons? Are Western Cathayan and dragon ogres all kin?
So the answer to this is that it is not established inside the lore what the direct connections between each of them are. As we'll go into as we dive into the history, there are clear links between many of the ancient species of the Warhammer world. And the dragons are one of the very first, arguably the first species of the Warhammer world, at least the first that comes to rise to rule it. Are wyverns related? Related in that all species are related to a degree more than they are directly related. In the same way that domesticated cats are related to tigers. Yes, is the answer. Are drakes or worms different from dragons? The answer is both yes and no, because those titles are used interchangeably for different species inside the Warhammer world. So the answer is both yes and no. Are Western Cathayan and dragon ogres kin? The first two are definitely kin of a sort. Of that, there's no doubt. They can definitely probably interbreed as well, which means that they're the same species, but they are different branches of the same species. Are dragon ogres kin, though? That looks less likely.
Yeah, there's a phrase that you will see show up so much in the setting is when it's talking about a big reptile-like creature. They'll say, like, distant cousins to the dragons. Is like literally their favorite phrase. And what exactly they mean by it, I would go with what Andy said about the whole thing with like cats and stuff, where I will note the wyvern one is always very funny because they usually will include a note where it says dragons are insulted by the insinuation that they're related to wyverns, which I always.
It's why I went for domesticated cats and and tigers is the difference, because the dragons are the tigers, the wyverns are the domesticated cats. They think they're self-important, but no.
Yeah, and you'll even find various creatures that it's not exactly clear. Like if you take like the shard dragon that's introduced in the Monstrous Arcanum, the lore tidbit about their history is given in universe. So it says lore masters speculate that they are an offshoot of a draconic species that went underground. Yep. So we don't actually know.
They all did.
Which is like, great job, guys.
Well done. Good bit of writing there.
What happens when? Yes, apparently that's what happens when we let our dwarfs try to figure out dragon lineage. But came out a hole in the ground. But it's messy. Is the core answer? It's messy.
Yep, agreed.
Giri Guronison, what about multi-headed dragons, such as 3, 7, 12, or even 100 heads?
Okay, so Gary, there is several examples of multi-headed dragons in the Warhammer world, and they are almost always, in fact, if I go through them all the ones that come to my mind immediately, chaos dragons, as in they are not what the dragon genome would produce. They are something that the winds of magic and the perversion of warpstone and other mutating effects have ended up as a result with. So in this particular instance, most multi-headed dragons in the Warhammer world are either A, not dragons, that's basically a hydra, or B, they are dragons that have been undergone mutation.
Yeah, the only way I could see this changing would be if they were to introduce, like, you know, if we were to go to like some new culture somewhere in the world and they were like, oh, look, now there's a multi-headed dragon that's native here. Yeah. But it hasn't happened yet.
Yep, agreed.
Cameo, since the tier list, I was wondering, how does undivided chaos worship work? Do the gods just compete over your mortal soul? Can you worship any and all gods, like cash it, even if you're human?
So this is a really easy question to answer. For all it looks super difficult, and because most writers don't understand worship. Most writers think of worship in a very Christian way, which is you have a god and you worship it, all the other gods suck. They don't exist. We're in a pantheon, in a world where multiple gods are real. The idea of worship is sometimes not the best word to use. The best words to use instead is you are looking for the, not necessarily the adulation or the praise, but most certainly the respect of those particular gods, that you want them to favor you. You want the favor of the gods, not a god, because that's stupidity. That means you've got to do just one thing. You want the favor of the gods, and worshipping undivided chaos is probably the wrong term. Instead, you are a follower of chaos and everything chaos stands for, and you are seeking the favor of all the chaos powers and the ones that you feel are important. And that is often not what you're going to be immediately thinking. Oh, so they're looking for Hashat or Tzeentch or whatever. No, it might be a greater demon. It might be something completely different. They're looking for the favor of a great power that will grant them benefit when they do whatever it is that they're doing. And that will often be a greater demon by equivalent, or a godling, or something else. They are often categorized by Games Workshop as worshipping chaos undivided because they only work from the perspective of 4 chaos powers, and all the rest is stuff that's sort of very ephemeral, and they don't discuss it much inside the core books. So the undivided chaos worship isn't undivided chaos worship. It's not like they're sitting there praising undivided chaos. What they're doing is they're seeking the favor of the chaos gods in whichever their local manifestations may be.
Yeah, one thing that I always find is a good test for if you're dealing with a really great writer that understands Warhammer Fantasy is like when you introduce a character that is like a mono god character, like someone that's like a hardcore coordinator or whatever, and other chaos characters look at that guy and they're like, that guy's insane.
Weird, yeah.
That's a weird dude. There are some authors that nail that really, really well.
Not to say that there's not entire tribes that are associated with one of the great chaos powers. There absolutely are. But the vast majority of, say, the Norse, for example, that are worshipping chaos are in fact seeking the favor of the chaos gods, so that the chaos gods will often not help them and look away and look at their enemies instead, because the chaos gods are freaking scary.
Mm-hmm. Garrett, hey, first time super chat. Well, hey, thanks. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
most important question, of course, which kind of dragon would be your favorite one? Man, this one again.
Kind of slightly different, but yes, you're right. Is this one again? We are going to get to that when we go through the kinds of dragons, Garrett.
I promise. I have a favorite plan. I promise. Biofoot. Are there fisherman civilizations with dragons at their head? Also, Sotek lost an island to the French last night. First of all, how dare you bring that up? We did get our revenge on the French. Second of all, sure, why not? I don't know.
If you were looking at the Warhammer world as a whole, the only giant dragons that we've had miniature style come from Man of War, which is the naval-based game. All of the miniatures that we've had for dragons across all of the games for Warhammer are broadly scaled for the Warhammer Fantasy Battle setting. Even when you turn to games like, say, let's say, what's his face? Warmaster, which was the tiny, like 3mm scale. The dragons in that, which were the commander models, were still scaled to Warhammer, not scaled to what the Warhammer world can offer. Man of War was different. Its gigantic dragons had entire cities sitting on the back of them. That's how big dragons can get. And the great sea dragons that you get are a core component of what can be found there. But these sea dragons are controlled by the Dark Elves. They are not allies of the Dark Elves. Are there civilizations down there that have giant dragons potentially associated with them? I think the answer is almost certainly yes, because the dragons do not appear to be passive watchers of civilization. They often get directly engaged. Some of them are refugees of the elves, and I am using that word quite clearly. There's a few examples of refugee dragons that used to be with the elves and have got free and do not want to go back at all. So you do find dragons everywhere, and I do think that some of them will be in exactly this position, and some of them might even wish to try and take out the elves for everything that has been done to their species by them.
Sean Schultz, what's your favorite dragon? What's our favorite specific dragon? I would within the setting.
Okay, so say in the setting rather than type of dragon. That's slightly better.
Yeah.
I have an extreme fondness for Mordax. Mordax is the father of most of the Chaos Dragons. And Mordax, I've even done a short story for over in Lorehammer. That was for the All Access patrons that got dropped up. No, it's not really Mordax. It's actually one of Mordax's kids. Has a short story written up. One of the ones that didn't fall to Chaos. And it's basically sourced in the Great Emperor Dragon from 3rd edition Warhammer. On the back of the box, you got yourself a lovely little bit of color text that described who Mordax was. And every once in a while, Mordax's name pops up inside Warhammer lore, but it's really rare.
Yeah, for me, I kind of can't help it. I really love Galroch. I'll never forget coming across his artwork for the first time in 6th edition. And his black and white art is gorgeous and horrifying.
Unlike the miniature.
Yeah, the mini is not held up. But the artwork that is hopefully one day going to inspire a better mini is genuinely gorgeous.
Agreed. I fought against that dragon more than once. I hate his fucking guts.
Yeah,
I love him also because he's brilliant.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I've also played against him, and it's not a fun time. Stephen Lucas, Games Workshop asks you to port Fire Slayers into the old world by pay or by gun to the head.
It's a gun to the head.
Yeah, I would agree. Justify, why would dwarves ride magma droths? Other changes? Where would you put them? Okay, I'm going to TLDR this one of that. I really wouldn't. I just really wouldn't.
Yeah. The guns to my head. I would be looking at placing them somewhere probably closer to the Chaos Dwarves than you might initially expect. And tying them over to the Mountains of Morn to separate them from everything else, and a unique strand of dwarfs that have managed to somehow eke out an existence over there. Justify why they ride the Magma Droths, because they're there, and they have almost certainly somehow trained, tamed, or otherwise made deal with them to join on side. But I really wouldn't. I just wouldn't.
Yeah. I think Andy's on a good thing. Like, if you were just pulling the ultimate bullshit of like ancient dwarfs similar to the Chaos Dwarfs got cut off, but went more of like a renegade route as opposed to like the Chaos route. Maybe the Fire Mouth is involved, so that's why they've got the Magma Droths as the big lava spewing lizards. They're like deep beneath it, and yada yada yada.
I mean, you could make an attempt at a Lustrian group that had something similar from this, but
true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's equal levels of bullshit at that point.
Given it's almost quarter 2, let's do one more and then dive into our first topic.
Darius Rose, weird question. Could the Saurus legions from the Great, I assume purification, you mean the Great Massacre, like
I think so.
Take down the Monsterverse? Don't laugh.
No, I don't think that's worth laughing. Because I think this is exactly what they were doing.
So yeah, if Monsterverse, I assume you mean like the Godzilla Monsterverse.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah. So I would say, yeah. Granted, Monsterverse stuff can get like really silly. But if you're constraining it to the Warhammer setting, like you're taking those Monsterverse creatures and you're making them very, very powerful, putting the Warhammer setting, this is what they were doing. They were going after the ancient, great primordial horrors of the world and killing them.
Yeah, in fact, this is almost a perfect place to stop, Darius, for us to now move on to a first part, because we can start with, where do dragons come from? It's pretty much perfect, because at the beginning of time, so pre the cataclysm, dragons were, as you say, presumably big-ass things, but they weren't just big-ass things, because dragons get bigger with age. The survivors of this time come the modern era, the very few survivors that we have from pre-cataclysm, are all enormous dragons. But that doesn't mean they were enormous back then, because a lot of them were young. The great fathers of dragons that we see back then would not necessarily have been that big, but the ones that were already ancient by the time of the cataclysm, after the great purification has largely done most of its work, the ancient ones then, yeah, they were big. And is that what the Saurus were trying to take down as they did their big stomp across the world? Yes, and they had weapons to do it. Remember, this is Old One time. It's not just that they're wandering around with, basic weapons and stabbing shit. They had effectively high-tech weaponry along with their more standard weaponry. We are dealing with a futuristic species taking out what is effectively a world full of megafauna. Truly big creatures. It wasn't just dragons. There was all manner of big burrowing creatures and things that wandered across the land. It was an era of giant monsters being slain, and they had the tools to do it, because, as we're about to go on to, the history of dragons starts at the beginning of time as far as Warhammer is concerned.
Yep. So that's a good jumping off point.
Perfect.
Yeah. So
thanks, Darius.
Like Andy said, if we turn back the clock a ridiculous amount, we're talking at minimum 17,000 years. Well, 17,500 years minimum. We arrive in the old world, or the Warhammer world, in a very different place, where it's much further away from the sun. Significantly more of the planet is covered in great ice sheets that kind of make it a lot more of it is traversable, because there's a significantly less ocean around. There is still pockets of ocean, because the equatorial band is noted to still be a great mighty jungle where you have your horrible Carnosaurs and Dreadsaurians and other nightmarish creatures that take advantage of the very dense jungle terrain. But the dragons are said, in what little scraps we have, to have been the dominant masters of this era. It was an age of dragons when the old ones arrived, with the dragons being the dominant force across the planet, and they were mostly involved in territorial disputes, where you have and we see some mentions of this in Shen Yang's background, the Celestial Dragon Emperor, where different dragons would take massive swaths of territory, which if you follow with the old Lizardman lore, which GW, funny enough, I do think likes to forget this sometimes, supposedly the planet used to just be a big Pangea within big ice sheets going further out, and then the Slann would later break the Pangea up and pull the continents apart. But we don't have a ton of lore about necessarily this era outside of a couple of little notes. Though with Shen Yang's introduction, we're starting to get more and more and more info. But we know that we had this era of great roving beasts. So there are things mentioned like the great Leviathans, the mighty, the Sky Titans. You've got your various different species of dragons. And the big dad, the big bad, whose name has managed to creep down through history, is there's 3 primordial dragons we know of, which we've got Shen Yang, obviously, who was said to be, he's kind of the big dad of the Far Eastern dragons. We've got Draupnir, who is the father, according to the Ulthwani dragons. So if you were talking to the most elves or the dragons that hang out with them, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, Dragnir is our primordial ancestor, our big dad." But then in the Storm of Magic, a lot of Old One scholars and stuff keep bringing up this guy called Calgalanos the Black, who's totally not Calagon the Black. He's Calgalanos the Black, very different. But he is stated to be the great father of all dragons from the understanding of the scholars of the old world.
And I think a slight pause here to make sure that we're clear. Rather than just simply do what Warhammer loves to do, which is say, they all come from this, we're beginning to see the seeds that they don't. These are just the beginnings of certain lines of dragons in the Warhammer world. And we have a very clear beginning point for most of the dragons in Ulthuan. And that's Draupnir. But the other dragons across the Warhammer world don't necessarily come from Draupnir. And Calgalanos is almost certainly the starting point for many, but not the only, because as I say, Mordax is dropped in more than one place also. We got a bunch of Emperor dragons, Emperor class dragons, and that is possibly a better way of looking at how our old world dragons think of themselves. They've all got ancestors, much like we in real life have ancestors, but dragon lives are much, much longer, and most of them can trace their lineages back to one of the great Emperor dragons that existed from before the Cataclysm.
Yep. And this is the state of things until the old ones arrive and they start messing with stuff. They start coming down to the planet. They start the biggest, of course, be the death blow that they deal to the Draconic Empire, the ancient dragon empires of this age, being that they move the planet closer to the sun, which has caused no end of consternation among some fans who look and go, well, shouldn't the dragons be cold-blooded? So shouldn't the planet getting warmer make them happier? But not necessarily the case.
No, it's not the case, because we know for certain that dragons do not like heat. They just don't. And it's clearly marked in multiple places, even for dragons that use Actuate as a primary source of their magical power or equivalent. They still slumber deep underground in caverns, away from the heat of the sun, and also away from the heat of volcanoes and similar, unless they are magma dragons or something similar. And they're taking it from directly the heat of that volcano. They very much sit in that. But almost all dragons despise heat, meaning that when the Warhammer world was brought into and closer to the sun, and the continents were split up and shifted, and Ulthuan was raised out from the waters, or moved, depending on which you go with, because if we go with our Ulthwani dragon tale, the dragons always lived in modern Ulthuan, always. So it just wasn't simply it came up from beneath the water. There's probably a bigger story here. Loosely, though, this causes enormous problems for the dragons, who become lethargic and who become tired and who need some extra source of power to effectively keep them going. And in later editions of Warhammer, it became quite clear where this source of power is. Now, I'm going to slightly diverge away from Warhammer here, because the story of the dragons comes from another setting originally, and then they had to basically repurpose it. The original story of the dragons comes from, and I'm going to say it one more time, Michael Moorcock. And in the time of the Elric novels, the great dragons that had slept in the dragon caves of Melnibone, which is basically what they copied for Ulthuani dragons and Calador. The great dragons had all fallen into long-term slumbers, and the reason for that was because chaos was waning in the world. They drew their power from chaos and the great changing magic that brought, and law was slowly establishing itself, and that made them slumber for long times. That take great workings of magic just to wake them up. The dragon song that later comes into Warhammer fiction, which is effectively the same thing that the Melnibonians were doing. Now, it made sense in Malcolm Moorcock's world, but when they ported it over and said all the modern dragons are slumbering, and they started trying to justify it, the first justifications being, well, it's because of what the Slan did. And then they realized, but no, there's loads of dragons doing stuff. They started trying to figure out, well, why are they slumbering? Okay, right, so it's the cold. They like the cold, and they don't function very well in the heat, so that'll do. But why are they now going? And the answer has been, quite clearly, the winds of magic, which is a great source of power for the Warhammer world. And the winds of magic change the dragons in turn, which is why we get what we get later. So loosely speaking, we now have a world where, even if it's not stated, when the chaos gates wax and magic floods the world, that's when the dragons wake up, because there's so much magic and the winds of magic that it's in some respect empowering in the same way that the old cold caves used to empower them. And you can see that as a justification for the great piles of gold that many of them sleep on, because that's a great gathering of the gold wind and other winds too, because a lot of them are filled with magic artifacts that they drag to them. You begin to see that there is a very clear, sensible tale of dragons using magic to bring themselves into a state where they're of higher consciousness. Without it, they will sleep possibly almost forever, unless they're small. The smaller dragons are much more active.
Yes. So moving into the more modern eras of the world, dragons are kind of what we talked about at the start of the stream, can be very, very loosely, we're talking super loosely, sort of categorized into 3 incredibly loose groups. So loose it's not even funny. And I'm going to talk about something later that's going to immediately turn around and slap what I just said in the face, but we'll get to that when we get to that. Because I think it wasn't intended, but it's funny when you read it. But so you've got your Dragons of Ulthuan, which follow some pretty fairly strict guidelines of like their coloration and personalities and stuff, and they tend to be seen as more benevolent. They have a very strong relationship with elves, and they're often like very, very noble, and you can like chat with them.
They're slaves.
Yeah, basically. You've got then, of course, your Eastern dragons, of which very few are still living that we know of. And all seem to tie their lineage back to just good old Daddy Shin Yang, who, instead of being the slave, has instead enslaved humanity, essentially. He's flipped the script. And then we've got the old world, where we kind of got dragons probably as close to their primordial state as is still seen in the world, where they are giant, badass, but also kind of mean monsters that are up to their own stuff. Though, whether or not they're actually truly antagonistic kind of depends on your point of view. Because
and
in
the
many
individual dragon.
Yes, and the dragon in question.
Yeah.
As there are some very, very noble creatures that appear in the old world. One of the things that we've seen is that like the forest dragons of Loren are very heavily they took root and like started moving into the forest of Loren. They were drawn by the extreme amounts of magic, which allowed them to stay awake, and it changed them, and they became kind of part of the forest. They almost kind of formed their own bond with it, similar to how the elves would later. And they evolved into what we know as like forest dragons, which are a very distinct species. We also have some creatures that are more, shall we say, feared. There are the dwarfs, of course. If you go back and check our Shin Yang stream where we talked about like the lore changes from the new Arcane Journal, one of the things me and Andy talked about that was, I think, a brilliant theory that isn't directly said, but makes a lot of sense, is that the dwarfs were ultimately an almost specifically designed species to kill the dragons, to hunt them down in the deepest places.
Yeah, it is something that was brought up directly in Lawhammer some time ago as well, because whenever you're attempting to justify lore in the background, you need to look at why things are. What were the old ones doing? The old ones were exterminating the older species, and the dwarves appear to have no greater purpose beyond living in mountains. But then when you realize that's where all the dragons gather, and that dwarves to this day are constantly hunting them, you begin to see that 2 and 2 makes 4. Their very first ancestor runes, some of the most important ones, so the ones that are on Grimnir's axe itself, is a dragon slaying rune. So Grimnir, the ancestor god who was directly he didn't just directly be influenced by, he talked to the old ones. He was there when the old ones were there in the glittering realm. He has inscribed in his axe, which means the first ancestor gods could do this, a rune to kill a dragon, not just to kill dragon-like entities, actual dragons. Grimnir is there to kill dragons, which in many respects means we can say definitively that the old ones wanted the dwarfs to kill dragons.
Yep, and our big show of this is that in the ancient dwarf myths of the time, the Great Golden Age, or actually before the Golden Age, that as they were exploring and they were kicking the dragons out of their own lairs, going down to the world, stealing their treasure hoards, murdering them when they were asleep, which they do a lot of. We'll actually get into one famous tale of that later. Grimnir, as the great warrior god in the epics, actually has a primary antagonist. It's not a demon. It's a dragon.
Yeah.
And it is a big fucker by the name of just Skaladrak. And Skaladrak, the dwarfs believe that Skaladrak is the great ancestor of all dragons. It was the first dragon. And to their credit, this dragon was so big and so goddamn scary that when Grimnir fought it in what we now know as the Black Mountains, their fight got so intense that Skaladrak's fire breath melted parts of the Black Mountains and gave us Blackfire Pass.
Blackfire Pass. So the great pass that sits through the Black Mountains down in the south of the old world was presumably, if we go according to the myth, created by the scouring flames of one of these great original emperor dragons. And I think the dwarves are correct in that many of the dragons of the old world will claim that particular dragon as their sire or their mother or their father or whichever particular one. Because let's be honest, the dwarves probably got his gender wrong too. Who knows what? I mean, the dragons and its egg laying and however they do it, I'm absolutely convinced the dwarves are not exactly experts in all things dragon. They're very good at killing them though. And Grimnir's job was to kill it, and he did. And you'll find that most of the emperor dragons of the original era were killed by either the lizardmen, chaos, or the dwarfs.
Yeah, so Skaladrak, of course, is brought down, which the dwarfs would come to somewhat probably regret later, but we'll get into that. And many of these great, super powerful ancient beasts are slowly but surely driven either so deep underground or beneath the ocean that nobody can find them. Or, like Andy said, they die in great fights. I saw somebody kind of earlier mentioning, asking if the dragons fought against like chaos, and they did. When the cataclysm happened, there were great mighty dragons that came out that didn't give a shit about any of the old one species, but they were just defending their own turf, especially as this massive amounts of magic filled the world. We know that the elves during this era were able to field so many dragons that their wings blotted out the sun. In these great battles. And it wasn't just an old one. There were like titanic mighty dragons getting up all over the world that the cataclysm in many ways would have been a kind of a fascinatingly horrifying event, because many different cultures and groups would have seen dragons getting up that had been asleep for millennia at that point.
Yeah. And they went to war. And they also were surprisingly resistant to chaos. Don't think the chaos dragons are a norm. And when I say that they were resistant, it seems that all of them pretty much went hard no to the chaos gods and everything they represent. And we only have one clear example of an early dragon corrupting to chaos, and that's been covered in another stream. Gal Rauch. I said it with a ch. I said it with a ch. But I'm Scottish. Cool. It's Gal Rauch. It's Gal Rauch. Anyway, Gal Rauch, and I'm going to die on that hill, even though it was written by an Englishman who would almost certainly say Gal Rauch. It's our first example of a chaos dragon, and it fell under very unique circumstances. Later on, we get far more chaos dragons, but we're not really discussing chaos dragons per se in this stream.
We go super in depth.
You'll get a really good idea, but there are a bunch of other chaos dragons as well. So most of whom have been brought about because chaos captures them and does something to them, or alternatively because of spells that have been wreaked upon certain dragons, which means that any of their children become chaos dragons by the sheer point of their birth.
Yep. That being said,
the case, I think we're at an obvious point to quickly run through a bunch more of the.
I'll leave us on one last note because
we
don't need to expand that much on it. It's just worth pointing out. Andy mentioned this earlier. I'm just going to double down on it. When you take into account how big dragons are in the actual setting of, like, we're talking about dragons that are so big that they're able to melt mountain ranges, and their tread quakes the earth, and they are truly colossal. The idea that anyone in the world can ride on one of these things and hold a stick and hit something with it is Frankly, very stupid.
I mean, some of them are so big in terms of their description, it would be better to say that a war could be fought on their back, not that you could ride it. That you would literally be having units of men fighting on its shoulders that they didn't realize it was a dragon they were on, rather than necessarily it was a giant dragon ridden by an elf. And this is something that comes in this lore more than once, where they say the great dragon, for example, an Aryan who rides the great dragon, that's in Draugr, which is one of the biggest emperor dragons ever. And then you read how big the emperor dragons get, and you're like, wait a minute. So we're talking probably at least 200 to 300 meters, maybe as much as a kilometer in length. What?
Yeah, it's like, he doesn't even have a lance. He's got the sword of Cain.
This is worse than Paul Atreides sitting on the back of a worm with an entire army behind him. That's what should have been described with an Aryan if he was riding a dragon of that immense size, where the reality is that the dragons they were riding were probably not emperor dragons as we understand them today. They are emperor dragons to be. They are almost certainly all ranging in about the 30 to 60 meter range. But yes, there is some weird inconsistencies with the size of dragons. Right, do you have where we are in our super chats?
Yes. Also, I will say, if you're someone that's watching, you're having problems on YouTube, if you refresh, it should be working.
It should do.
Cool. All right, so Phil, I was wondering if dragons could actually speak. Because if they don't, then I was wondering how they or any other species without speech could cast spells without speaking the one language.
Okay, so this one is inconsistently applied by different authors. Some authors have dragons speaking with no difficulty at all, which means that we have to somehow describe how the passage of air and the movement of their rather firm mouths form lips and movement in a fashion that allows them to chat. You'll find that there are some really dodgy animations of various movies of dragons that talk that try to justify a dragon doing the thing. It's a movie. And when you take this into account, the depth and tone of their voices would probably be so deep that most humans couldn't understand or hear it anyway. So the size of some of the bigger dragons cause some issues. But for dragons that are in the 30 meter sort of 30 yard, if you prefer, area, they absolutely could articulate voices within vocal ranges with no problems at all. Deep throated voices. However, some writers also have them effectively communicating telepathically, where when they talk, the sounds reverberate around them, and either they are heard, so they telepathically push the sound out and it is heard by everybody, or it just goes straight to the minds of others. Both of these, I think, are probably true. Some can talk, some can project sound out of them, some of them can directly mentally, telepathically communicate, because all of those have precedence in the Warhammer world. And as you tend to note in our streams, we prefer to say, if it's been written somewhere, we try to incorporate that and make it make sense. So all of them are probably true. Some of the younger dragons who attempt to communicate and they're making screams and howls at each other are using actual vocal chords and vocal sounds that their mouths can make. It might not be chords, they might have something else that allows them to make that thrum of sound that you get when you voice something. The over the unvoiced is the sighing sound. The vocal cords coming in is the sound that comes through, and they'll have something similar. But on top of that, as they get older and they master different types of magic, assuming that they do, then perhaps some of them use more telepathic means or use magic in different ways. The important part here, though, from the question's perspective is, can they use magic? Because magic requires, in most cases, some method of articulating sound to cause the immaterial magic around you to manifest into something real. And the answer is yes, which means that they can somehow definitely project sound.
Yep. Man, to clarify earlier, I posted out of order to keep the post on topic. The real order is dragons are in Koshun, old ones come, king says, all right, let's hide. Crown prince defies him and leaves, wonder who he is. Humans show up in Koshun, chaos comes, dragons, humans form as lions. Yep, that's a story you can run with.
Go.
Captain Magma, clan molder rat dragons. Yes. They probably exist and they're probably horrifying.
I think they have attempted to do it and it's mostly failed and created only abominations that they can't control. Dragons appear to be really very resistant to being used in this fashion. But because the Skaven are Skaven, they've almost certainly taken dragon eggs. They've made many attempts. But I think the lowest pit of Hell Pit is probably filled with most of their failed attempts to actually make a proper rat dragon.
Yeah. Walking Tree, how in the name of Aisha, or Isha, however you would like to say it, would something as proud and majestic as a dragon be ridden by some puny little man thing? I mean, would you let an ant ride you? I mean, you might not notice an ant is on you.
Yeah, totally. And the answer is here that they may be puny in terms of scale, but they're not necessarily puny. Because there's many humans, many elves, many people of the Warhammer world that are capable of channeling magic that's so powerful that armies themselves will quake. Taking one of those on your back is not a bad idea, because they can not only provide you with massive magical support, which is always good when you're potentially attempting to slay something else, but they can also provide you with magical lift, magical movement. If you are a creature that is influenced by magic, that extra magic around you is going to benefit you as a dragon. So magic users on dragons 100% makes sense in background. When it comes to just fighters, a general setting, you're more Imric alike, that begins to make much less sense. Much less sense, particularly because it would take a weapon approximately 50 yards long for them to actually reach anyone down on the ground, because some of the dragons of Warhammer are so big. That's why the big star lances of the elves are really, really, really long, so that they can reach down when they're on top of the backs of one of their dragons. Having said that, though, elven dragon riders make complete sense because they effectively enslave their dragons. The Elfwani dragons are different. So thus, they are effectively vehicles for the elves. It's a flip on the situation here. When it's not a flip and you have to persuade them, you better have a damn fine reason for effectively trying to coerce this dragon, or persuade, or charm, or seduce, depending on your preferred word, this dragon into providing you with some sort of support. But the vast majority of people sitting on the backs of dragons will be useless. Watch Game of Thrones to see just how much fighting happens with a person on the back of a dragon. They're basically just flying around, doing nothing, going, and screaming as they go down, because their weapons can't reach. Dragon riding is useless as a platform for being a warrior. Dragon riding is great for getting you to one place to the next, though.
Yep. And the funny thing is that the guy on top of the dragon, if you're a warrior, literally the biggest thing is you're literally aura farming. You're trying to intimidate the enemy and impress your army by being like, look at this big fucking beastie I'm on. That doesn't really need you up there. It's more probably for your allies and foes than anything else.
Yeah, true fact.
That being said, there are things dragons want. They can be bargained with. It happens a lot in the setting.
Yep.
Christ Vandy, how do civilizations deal with orc spores after battle? They salt the field or burn the bodies?
Most don't know. There's nothing to deal with. There's literally nothing to deal with. The vast majority of spores die as well because they don't like the sunlight. Their spores don't cope at all well with sun. So they only really settle into the dark forests or under the leeway of rocks. And even then, if it gets caught under leeway rock and a few mushrooms pop up, the likelihood of anything even as small as a snotling coming from that are really low. It's a few squiggly things that come up and spread the spores as they spread out. But sunlight deals almost all the damage. So they don't really need to do anything.
Yep. Good old solar radiation. Good stuff.
Yep.
Scarstick's top guy, formerly known as Thanos. Man, he's really
wow.
He's been around.
Scarstick's top guy.
Yeah. Just discovered you guys a couple of weeks ago, and you've been playing nonstop in my ears during work. Oh, well, thank you and welcome. Appreciate that.
Why did you find us?
Agar89. Hey guys, just gotta say, in Wolfram 4th edition, dragons are a lot scarier to fight than other RPGs such as D&D. It's nice to see it's basically an impossible task.
That was by intent. I would have preferred that the ridiculously huge, impressive dragons had a slightly different rule set than they currently have. But nevertheless, the rule set that they have just now makes a dragon almost, not quite, but almost impossible for your standard party to kill without something really impressive on their side, like dragon slaying weapons or dragon defending weapons, which is far more important. Because when they smack you, given your average PC has maybe, I don't know, 15 up to maybe 30, 40 wounds at most. So in that band, and given that their minimum damages are often in the 50 to 100 mark, just getting hit once, you're dead. You can't parry that because their hands are so big.
Dragon's just sitting there like, oh, that's cool. Check out my size rule.
Yes, this is, Agar, this is 100% my fault because I got fed up of the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2 situation where the dragons that were statted were less powerful than the PCs that I've been using for the last half year. And that was just daft. I mean, they're dragons. They're supposed to be scary.
Yeah, it should be like you're doing the entire campaign building up to killing one, if you're going to be able to kill one.
We had a really funny one. I'm not going to spoil what happened in Lorehammer last Friday, but I will say that someone tries exactly this, and it's fucking hilarious.
Doom Lord of Malal. Hi, are dragons afraid of vampires? I don't think dragons are afraid of much, if anything, outside of very specific circumstances.
So Doomlord, there's an issue here, and that's largely that first, intelligence. The vast majority of dragons don't know about vampires.
Yeah.
They're just little things that are traipsing around. Most dragons are sleeping or they're very young. So this sort of thing isn't something that even crosses their mind. Do we get the occasional dragon that faces off a vampire that turns out to be rock hard? Yes. And would it make that dragon wary? Yes. But we're talking about an individual, not the group dragons. So the group, not in the slightest. An individual, very possibly.
Yep. Pormicia, has there ever been a dragon in the previous editions that belongs to a different race than the elves that has been added but then got deleted in next editions?
I mean, then deleted is the tough one because you often find, particularly because Warhammer ended on its 8th edition, where they were just adding rather than deleting anything. So they took anything in the previous ones and went, actually, I'm just going to bring that back. Yeah! So Karl Franz, for example, could ride a dragon back in 4th edition. I'm going to go further. All Empire characters could ride a dragon in 4th edition, but it specifically called out that there might be one in the Imperial Zoo. That got kind of removed in later editions because it was bluntly stupid, and then it kind of got brought back again at the end.
Yeah, I was going to say, Karl Franz could ride it in 8th.
Yeah, he can in 8th. So yes, that has sort of occurred. But you tend to find that dragons are such a massive imbalancer of the Warhammer game that dragons got removed from almost every army list because they were so powerful, stupendously so. So they just went, well, this is too powerful for our game, so we'll push them by the wayside. Or they gave them crap stats. Take a look at Galrout. She was given the worst stats known to man that absolutely didn't match how that dragon had been described.
Yeah, I can't think of any like notable named dragon that got removed from the setting. They didn't do that terribly often, where they would just like remove things per se.
Yeah, you tend to find that rather than specifics, it was general, and that in early editions they could all do it, and then later on only a few species could do it.
Yeah, and that also tied in with like how like every army used to be able to bring a ridiculous amount of animal creatures, and then that got removed.
Yeah.
Dan Parrish, hi Lorebeards, got an RPG question for you both real quick. I have a homebrew fantasy setting inspired by Warhammer, but it is not Warhammer. I'm considering using the Warhammer RPG to run the setting. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, that works fine. Warhammer works fine for that. I'm not saying that I'm currently building a set of rules that could do exactly that for something else, but trust me, I might have a better option for you it's in the midterm future.
Stay tuned. Somalian, Teef Money. Thank you. D&D question because Dragon Stream. Ever considered a world building stream with Keith Baker? Eberron's setting has a lot of interesting contrasts with Warhammer that would be fun to explore, in my opinion.
I mean, we haven't. I mean, most of the streams where we've had guests on are people who are directly related to what we're discussing. And Keith Baker sort of isn't, because Eberron is a completely different setting. But, we could. I mean, if anyone knows him and wants to reach out on our behalf, well, we'll always speak to anyone, really.
Yeah. Prometheus, later editions, the Shard Dragon was added into the Old World Dragons. How do you describe that dragon origin-wise to the Warhammer world from an evolutionary perspective?
We're going to be discussing Shard Dragons when we get there. So, Parmesia, I'd suggest we'll pick that up when we go through all the different categories, which is probably going to be the next step.
Yeah, will be the next thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Okay, we'll just do a few more of these. Warmonger, would there have been more Old World Dragons who collaborated with the old ones, similar to Ben Thradia, the Storm That Roars, mentioned the Old World Bestiary Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition. Any dragons in Albion as well?
So the answer to this is there's an awful lot more dragons that are collaborating than you might expect, but most of them are collaborating for a reason, and it's often not free will. Take, for example, what happens to Caledorian dragons. They're called Caledorian dragons, or the Elfwani dragons, because of Caledor. Or let's just very quickly say who Caledor was. Caledor, we'll say it many times, dragon tamer. Tamer, not dragon friend, not dragon pal, not dragon ally, not dragon lover, dragon tamer, because they found a way to tame them, and that was with Old One influence, because Caledor is pre-cataclysm. His story is now pushed right back to pre-Cataclysm. He settled the area. The entire area is named after him, and he took the dragons under his control, almost certainly with Old One's support. And other dragons elsewhere, in Albion, for example, almost certainly were also taken under control or were forced into service with punishment of death, because the Old Ones were not nice guys.
Yeah, there's a very good story that exists in the Black Library books that's kind of told in two parts, which is that if you read the War of Vengeance trilogy, there is a dragon that plays a notable role in the story who hates the elves. He just hates them. And he's a big, mean old world dragon that they literally use brute force through the dragon song to compel him to obey them.
Yep.
It
really says a lot about the elves.
Yeah, and it's like it's a very well written whole aspect of the story about how some of the elves are like, whoa, this is kind of fucked up, and other elves are like, bullshit, this is the way we used to do it, and it's war. It's war. We need to use these methods.
Yeah.
And then if you actually go and read the Bruner the Bounty Hunter series, there is a very similar, or maybe the exact same dragon, who there's a whole elf artifact that compels him and is being used to control him against his will. And he comes barreling into Bretonia to destroy that artifact when that dragon realizes it's been unearthed. And it's the entire point of the third book, which is sizable.
And it's also the reason that I had to tell the people who were writing the book, the Bretonian book that they were building, that they had to completely change one of the cities because it should have been half scoured. No, 2/3 scoured by Dragonfire, because boy did he completely mess that place up. Musalon was not what it used to be. So yeah, super fun times.
Yeah. Also note, it was the Goody Two Shoe High Elves, by the way, that were doing that, because they had already had
High Elves are not good guys.
Yeah. All right, we've got Prophetum. Given the existence of Shukaguns in Cathay, could no world dragon have similar children with human/dwarf/elf/beastmen in the old world?
The answer to that is no. Unless it's yes. And by that I mean, the reason that it works with the Shugagans is because there is shapeshifter blood in there that allows it to effectively work. It's all the Dragon Empress's fault, effectively. She's not a dragon. Let's be as clear as we can be. She might take on the form of a dragon, but she's a shapeshifter from the moon. In the same way that, for example, various werewolfy types or were creatures in Warhammer are directly associated with the moon and the full moon rising. Shapeshifters in the moon come hand in hand, and the Empress is a shapeshifter. The Cathayan dragons are not dragons in the current sense that we would be describing. They're half dragon. And their children, the Shugagan, are only a quarter dragon in terms of their overall blood base. So the answer here is almost certainly not. They're different species, but dragons are special all the time in Warhammer. So very possibly some of them have, can, may, who can say? But the answer is, at least at the top level, no.
Giri Garanison, the Bathory family originate from a Dragon Slayer.
Yeah, and I think if we were building a Drac family tale, so the Von Dracs from Sylvania, we almost certainly would have some dragon reference to the original history, particularly because the great mount, that there's a spur of the Wurgel's Mountains that comes out from the World's Edge, and Drakenhof is right on the end of it. And that great spur is called the Drakenus something or another mountains. I can't remember off the top of my head. I mapped it ages ago. And there almost certainly was dragons in those mountains, and they're almost certainly tied to the original Drac name of the era. So I think that's probably a very good reason to have the Drac name be Drac, and that's because it was tied to some dragon slaying in the past.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to keep going until we hit 130, and then we'll get back to the talking about types.
Perfect.
Baron von Bastard, if armies of dragons and dragon ogres face each other, will they ignore the main enemy forces to fight each other first, given the ancient rivalry? It would depend on factors like how, is the dragon like a fully enslaved dragon? Is it like an ally? Does it really care? It's like people. Like sometimes people don't really give a shit. If it's a younger dragon, it might not remember those wars, and it's like, whatever, I don't give a fuck. So it just depends.
Yeah, so Baron von Bastard, this is basically the drama of the moment. What is the drama? Who are the characters? Why are they warring against each other? Dragon ogres are almost all, to a degree, allied with chaos, meaning that they're almost certain to be the enemy of dragons anyway, so they'd probably be fighting anyway. But there's going to be individual stories here, and what those individual stories are is the subject of whatever the writer's concerning themselves with.
Skylar Martin, do dragons talk / are intelligent? Yes, they are intelligent. And we talked about the talking thing earlier.
I'm actually going to add an extra detail there. Not always. Some of the dragons are portrayed almost like beasts, as if the youngest or the most recent versions of dragonhood are no longer quite the ancient, very intelligent dragons we had. This is particularly common through the 5th edition through to about the 6th, where they were trying to make dragons more and more beast-like, rather than the original version that you had back in 3rd edition, where they were absolutely, mostly, relatively intelligent people, more Smaug-like than, let's say, a monster that had dragon qualities. Later on, though, they went back to, yeah, no, fuck it, dragons are clever. So the answer to this is, yeah, probably. And you can easily justify it by saying that most of the younger dragons, so when they're in their adolescence, or perhaps when they're just in their youth and they're tiny, they're pretty dim, just like children are a bit dim. So until they actually reach their age of majority, for our dragon, it might be 100 years or even more. These creatures that are terrorizing villages and just running off with sheep or some equivalent, and everyone's scared of as the great dragon, are basically babies. And they're not that clever, and it allows you to have both intelligent and unintelligent ones. Should they survive their first 100 years of life or so from stealing sheep and predating upon local communities, then they will slowly get that dawning intelligence as they go, oh, well, maybe I should go be doing something a little bit less antagonistic where I'm less likely to be hunted down for just living.
Yep. If so, could they hold court amongst mortal subjects / head their own cult?
Yes.
Yeah, not unprecedented. There have been a lot of dragon cults in the Warhammer world.
Yes.
Darius Rose, how many animals are mistaken for being dragons by most people? Like people who mistake Dimetrodon, a synapsid stimum, for a dinosaur. Yeah, that would happen a lot. I would say a lot of people in the Warhammer world would see something reptilian and be like, dragon!
Yeah, completely. And it also gives the writers coming in later editions to justify some of the weirder stories that have been attributed to dragons as being attributed to a different species, meaning that they can say dragons are actually this, and those things that happened previously, that just wasn't a dragon. That was something that people thought was a dragon. It's particularly the case for the dwarfs, who basically rename everything they meet with their own dragon name. And they go, well, that one's called Excalibur. I mean, is it? Yep, it is. And we're killing it. And often their descriptors are very simple, like the big black dragon. Oh, Lorebeards. We're off to kill it. The answer is yes.
Yeah, there's also like if you go back to our Temple City stream when we waxed lyrical about like how the Dragon Isles might have been named, could have literally been a case of someone seeing some feral source and being like dragon. A certain preternatural priest. My favorite Divinity 2 Ego Draconis greetings from Nippon. Thank you. Currently enjoying my holiday here on a 2-week tour. Oh, have fun. Have a good time. Off topic, but what's the worst book ever written for Warhammer? Something truly awful.
I mean, I want to call out the End Times, but it's not because it's terribly written. It's because what they write is bad. The writing's mostly fine.
Yeah, that's what a lot of them fall under, is that the writing itself is usually fine. It's more of like how it interacts with the setting that I go, oh dear. Yeah, for me, it has and probably always will be the Nagash trilogy.
Trilogy.
God, I hate the Nagash trilogy. It just introduced the most bizarre storylines that just didn't need to be there.
Yeah, it's hard not to fault that one.
Yeah. Dynaman, have you ever seen the fictional British documentary The Last Dragon, known as Dragons Fantasy Made Real in the US, which details how they could have evolved in our world? Recommend if you have it. That sounds so like History Channel these days. It's not even funny. That's actually hilarious. No, but, I mean, if it's good, I'll have to give it a watch. I love those kinds of little things. Yeah, I remember being in elementary school and I got the little cartoon book. It's like the dragon book or the Book of Dragons or whatever, where it like the book was like, oh yeah, dragonologists have done all this research about where dragons are hiding in the real world. And of course, being in elementary school, I was like, this is fact. Yeah, this is just fact.
Yeah.
I will never forgive my 5th grade teacher for being like, there are no dragons, and me being like, oh. Brock 6000. Why are there so many dragons in the Drakvald versus other areas? Were there specialized knights for dragon slaying that would visit other provinces?
So Brock, there is a specific story here that's worth noting, and the answer is surprisingly simple, and that's because there's mountains there. And thus there is a place for dragons to live, and some did. And in other parts of the empire, they didn't. So thus, in the primordial empire, where they were effectively arriving for the first time, all the different tribes of humanity, they arrived in a place where dragons happened to be living, and thus it became the Dragfield. And those dragons were, over the course of multiple generations, eventually hunted down. And again, for those of you who watched Lawhammer, last episode, literally last Friday, tackles this directly. In particular, it discusses the Thuringians, which are the tribe that was behind the Drakvalders. And we dive into that. One of the players is playing a Thuringian. And their close association with dragons.
There you go. Prometheus, considering the horrific power and are being very majestic, dragons are celestial, but somehow human nations across the Warhammer world don't worship any dragons. Why?
Because most of them are asleep under the mountains. They are not in the sky. They're not flying around for everyone to go, wow, they're great. Let's worship that thing. The only time that it generally happens is during a great upswelling storm of magic, which comes with the great invasions of chaos and a never chosen. And then you're too busy, possibly not dying, to be worrying about dragons.
Yeah, I very much agree.
And other stuff.
Right, last one before we get into
there are some dragon communities that worship, though.
Yeah, they tend to be smaller because it's going to invite challenge as well, which a lot of dragons don't want to deal with. Ricky, in one of our Wolfram campaigns, you rode on a Warpfire dragon, Exoridroth, the Vile Desolation, and the lead armor we had to wear was less armor and more a lead coffin to keep the effects of Warpstone away. A classic.
Good luck.
Classic. Yeah, good luck.
Love it, Ricky. All right, types of dragon then. We're going to do those.
Yes, so we're basically going to discuss the various types of dragons that are known throughout the world. I will note very much that this list is explicitly said to not be exhaustive. There are many, many types of dragons we just don't know about. For instance, the books basically kind of confirm that there is at least one species of dragon for every one of the winds of magic. We don't know half of them. Like, we don't know what beast dragons are called. Probably amber dragons, but they might not. Probably. They might be known.
That's why I call it.
Yeah,
it's easy.
Your dragons of Shaman are probably gold dragons.
Gold dragons,
more than likely. But once again, not hard confirmed, but they're out there somewhere. So when we got the Storm of Magic, this is where GW kind of went crazy, which is being like, look at all these types of dragons, and they just threw them all over the place. And they basically, this is where they went really hard on the idea that each of the winds has a different type. And they gave us just kind of a loose list. And this would then later be expanded on by further books from Forge World. So the most famous and the most iconic, of course, are your red dragons. Actually, an Axii dragon. Just big red dragon. It breathes fire.
Yep.
Woohoo! Classic.
We don't need to say anything else. I do think that it's also worth noting that dragons are often categorized in the books by size, and they often directly correlate to age. So it starts off with tiny little dragons. So be aware, all the dragons we're about to list are broken up loosely by this to younger dragons, to great dragons, and then eventually the emperor dragons. And the emperor dragons is a very, very loosely defined term. It's basically the biggest ones, and it might mean a dragon from the Cataclysm, which means a dragon so big that no one could ride it anyway. Or alternatively, it could just mean a very big, powerful dragon that's enough that if it's ridden, everyone will go, well, that's an enormous fuck-off dragon. They're normally the ones that go up to about 60 yards, meters in length, somewhere around that area. But when they are true Emperor dragons, they can be so much bigger.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that only the Emperor dragons are said to be able to cast magic. So only like the oldest, really big, nasty dragons are capable of being spellcasters.
Yeah, and that's more of a game balance thing, though.
Yeah, it's a game balance thing, not necessarily the way it would work hardcore in the setting. But it also, your older dragons would probably be more proficient with spells.
Much more, yeah. And I would suggest that this also lends credence to the idea that the younger dragons, up to the youngling type ones, basically the more monstrous ones are basically just young babies. They're incapable of learning magic. And once we reach those who are in their sort of younger teenage years, okay, maybe a century or so old, they're the ones that might start dabbling, but they're not in the point where they're actually casting spells. It probably takes maybe at least a century to 2 centuries to even reach the point where they're doing anything more than just flying on one of the winds of magic. So broadly speaking, it comes with age.
Yeah, the poor guys don't exactly have a college of magic they can attend.
Exactly.
They got to feel it out. But like Andy was saying, what the book also introduces, which is just kind of fun, is that when they get up to Emperor class, they can become known by a certain term. So your fire dragon, for instance, if it grows to such size and age that it becomes Emperor class, becomes known as a Doom Fire Dragon.
The Doom Fire Dragon.
Which pretty much literally the only thing they say about, which is just very funny, which is that they're extremely angry creatures. They're very passionate because of all that action that they have around them, and they take extreme delight in incinerating towns and cities and villages. They like burning things.
So basically, they're actually obsessed dragons. Although when they're just red dragons, they're not necessarily so actually oriented. And again, just to make sure that's clear, that's the red wind of magic that floods across the Warhammer world. But when they are absolutely soaked in it for centuries and reach the bigger sizes, most of them are very excitable, very angry, very spiteful entities.
Yeah. So. Remember that whole thing I was saying earlier about how like the Ulthwani dragons are kind of a separate category from the old world dragons? Well, prepare for the book to just turn around and go, haha, no. And just make things messy, because we get the black dragons.
This is where it gets a bit messy.
Yeah, and you
black dragons are messy.
Yeah, and you may look and go, what, Sotek, I thought y'all said that we weren't talking about like the Ulthwan dragons, which I thought Malekith stole all his dragons from Ulthwan and made them into black dragons. And he created black dragons, and I go, yeah, and no.
Yeah, but no.
So, and this book even actually does address it, where it even says that even before they were warped by the dark sorceries of the Witch King Malekith, you have spooky black dragons that are roaming around the world. Obviously, we have Kaldalanos, the Black, who is said to be the big bad. So the book kind of, it doesn't really deal with it. It just sort of like hand waves it. But these dragons are actually a little different than Malekith's black dragons, which are said to be a specific breed created and enhanced by the dark sorcery of the dark elves. They'd actually probably be more accurately described as dark dragons because of the fact that they're manipulated by Dar. Whereas these ones are natural creatures that are associated with death.
Yeah, we've got, in fact, now I'm going to go slightly further than that. The black dragon, and particularly if we look at the black, appears to be the source of the colored dragons, in that there's this idea that from the black dragons came the other dragons. And it's not just death, although some of the darker dragons are associated with Shyish. There's so many dragons associated with Shyish, it's almost not worth mentioning them all.
Yeah, you're about to go, wait, I thought you said here in about 2 seconds, but I'll let you finish.
Totally. Dragons have a lot of conflicting background, but the idea that dragons were originally black is dropped in more than one place, and that the coming of the winds of magic and the coming of the cataclysm brought dragons that were very susceptible to this magic to a whole host of different colors after that. And the black dragons that come after the cataclysm are ones that were specifically bred by the dark elves to be black. And I do agree with Sotek that dark dragons is probably a more accurate name, so that we get the difference between them. You've got the true black dragons, which may be the original almost dragon form for some, and then you've got dark dragons, which are the more powerful bred dragons of the dark elves, and possibly not the most intelligent either in the greater scheme of things, because they are controlled very, very powerfully by magic.
Yeah, once again, if you want to have your heart broken, go read the War of Vengeance trilogy, where you actually get the point of view of a black dragon, like a dark elf black dragon. It is really tragic.
Poor thing.
Yeah. Now, the fun thing about these black dragons, so once again, separating them, dark elf black dragons, which I'll just call dark dragons for the rest of the stream for the sake of ease.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
They breathe a noxious gas, which is super nasty. It's really nasty. Classic black dragons actually breathe a different material that fucks with people's brains, basically. It doesn't say whether it's a gas or not, but it's not fire, it's something else. But it causes people to like freak out. Like, it causes you to see horrible things and you throw your weapons down and run away.
Yeah, it's terrifying, basically. And it further suggests that there is this that the dragons have this ability to also telepathically communicate, because it really does speak to them fucking with other people's minds.
Yep. This then builds up to our big death dragon that absorbs lots and lots of the wind of death. And you might go, oh, I know this one. That's that amethyst dragon that Elspeth von Draken rides on. And I go, haha, no, you're technically
it's gonna get worse.
wrong. This is the Nightmare Dragon.
Yeah, this thing sucks.
So Nightmare Dragons, it's literally what you would think on the 10. So this one is really funny because the way they phrase this, which is they're believed not to be real. Which so you could actually look at that and be like, oh, well, they're just not real. And Elspeth's is the actual one. But in any event, so these guys are basically very spooky. It's believed by many that they're just living motes of amethyst. Actually, I will note, I think the guys that wrote the Monstrous Arcanum may have played with this in a fun way, because if you actually go read the Monstrous Arcanum, the incarnate elemental of death is a two-headed draconic thing.
Yeah.
So it could be that this is what they're alluding to, because in this book it literally says the Nightmare Dragons are believed to be living motes of...
And there is an example of one over in Tamarkan. It's Omdra. Omdra is a gigantic nightmare dragon. True. Okay, Omdra the Dread. So they are real, as much as they're playing with it a little bit. They are.
She's horrifying.
Omdra sucks hard. Go read Tamarkan if you want to know more. But Omdra is an enormous emperor dragon, which is absolutely suffused with Shyish, and is indeed a nightmare dragon made flesh.
She literally just raises an undead horror legion. Casually.
Yeah, absolutely. And comes from the plane of bone. We're going to have to discuss the plane of bone after the dragon types, because the plane of bone is super important for dragons and is a super important location for them as a whole, and also speaks to the Dragon Isles, which is just south of it, potentially having a true association with dragons, for all we have previously suggested that it's probably just lizardmen.
Yeah, so the Nightmare Dragons are said to be the big, scary Emperor class version of your Black Dragons. All right, so from there, and they're heavily associated with Shyish. Speaking of Shyish, we also have the Carmine Dragon, which is the type that Elspeth rides on. They are nasty motherfuckers. They are said to, their eggs grow in areas that are heavily suffused with Shyish, and then they hatch into these kind of amethyst, kind of like reddish amethyst colored scales. They look a little different, but not crazy different from most dragons. But the thing that's very unique about them is that their breath is awful. Like, they breathe literal just Shyish at you, and if it hits you, it turns you into, you basically get hit by purple sun, which turns you into amethyst glass. Like, you just instantly die.
Yeah, super fun. So they're born red and they grow purple with age until eventually, assuming you get your Emperor class, they will also be a black dragon, because as is often the case with Warhammer dragons, they kind of just mix up the lore as they go. So this is another Shyish type.
Black dragons, for those counting at home.
Yeah, indeed. So this is our next black dragon type, and the Emperor class here would effectively turn everyone into, again, an enormous swathe of crackling purple crystal.
Yeah, and now here's where we get into one that's frankly a little weird. So we have our Frost Dragon.
Which one? Frosties.
So Frost Dragons, very cool. They're pretty much, what you would expect on the thing. They're big icy dragons. They have a lot of ice code themes and stuff. They literally chill everything around them, and they are noted for being particularly vengeful sons. Like, they're mean. In that if you do something to piss them off, they will hold a grudge, and they will wait to get you when you least expect it. As you might imagine, a lot of them in Norska, a lot of them in Kislev. We do actually see a lot of allusions to them. We, of course, in Kislev, we now have the Ice Worm, which is different, and we also have the Chaos Frost Dragon, which is different than these guys. The Chaos Frost Dragon literally just being these guys, but they've been mutated.
Chaos, totally.
Now, where this gets a little funky is that these guys, when they become Emperor class, level up into the Ice Dragon. And the Ice Dragon is a little weird.
It's the more of light.
Yeah, because they're the light dragon. But instead of being, I don't know, white or something, they're ice. And everyone who keeps up with their lores of magic looks at it and goes, why?
And I'll
Why,
tell
though?
you why. It's because ice dragons already exist in the Warhammer setting, and ice magic exists in the Warhammer setting, but there is no wind of ice in terms of the classical 8 winds of magic. So the writers here, who desperately wanted to make all their dragons attached to one of the winds, went, well, there's only one that looks like ice and is white. It's Heish. Heish has nothing to do with ice. The only one of the 8 winds you can make a good argument for Heish with is, of all, and this may surprise some of you, Gur. Because Gur, this atavistic bestial wind, is also a very cold, chilling wind. It chills you to the bone, both because it scares you and because it is actually cold. Yeah,
That may very well have been what the writer was thinking.
Right? It's a really weak connotation. The only true link is it's white. That's it. And they went, well, that's where we're going to attach it to. And in truth, if you're looking at the Warhammer world as a whole, you would just simply say, yeah, nah, it's clearly tied to the ice magic and whatever ice magic is. But that doesn't work with the very simple 8-wind paradigm that is often the focus of most Warhammer writers.
Yeah, if you were going to interpret these better into the setting, they would use ice magic. Yeah, because they're just tied into the natural magic of Kislev. And you go, oh, great.
Great.
Yeah, and personality-wise, even matches up. Whoa, we lost Andy. Nope, we lost Andy for a second. Oh, I just realized my title's wrong. Oops, all chaos. He's coming back. He's coming back.
Button on my mouse, and it went, oh, you know what?
Hilarious. So the fun thing about them that actually makes them work really well as the Kislevite ass dragons is they're known as being very sedate. They're very calm, relaxed dragons. They don't do a whole lot. They're happy to just kind of exist and vibe, which is funny.
The ice dragons are so out of sync with Heish, which is the wind of enlightenment, the wind of intelligence, the wind of sentience, that this could not be further away from what ice dragons are. So this is the one where I'm going to clearly call out that the writers could have made a different choice, and if I was coming and writing it later, I would change this directly. Either
should have had
changing how the
white
link
dragon,
works,
ice dragon.
Absolutely. Well, white dragon should be that. It's almost the high dragon. It's a completely different type of dragon. But yeah, no, we didn't get it here. So the ice dragon is a bit of a fun one. So what we're going to go to next?
Next, we got the forest dragons. Forest dragons. You know them, you love them. There are kind of two different vague kinds, which is you have the Athalloran ones that are very tied deeply into Athalloran. But there are forest dragons that exist outside of Athalloran as well that aren't
green dragons of green dragons of various types across the old world.
Yeah, and they're dragons of Gyran. They're very straightforward. They're known for being kind of solemn. They like to be left alone. They like being very solitary creatures. When they build up to, which the Athalloran dragons are very similar, but they also enjoy games. Like the Athalloran dragons are actually very, very fun because the way the Wood Elves have to recruit them is they have to go ask them basically for permission. And the dragons will usually want something, but sometimes it's as simple as beat me in a game of riddles, which is enjoyable.
Yeah, the Athalloran ones have become more fairy tale dragons in many respects. So they take on an almost fey aspect, much like the woods in which they live, where the green dragons as a whole are just venom-dropping, hideous, hellish green dragons. With gouts of venomous smoke.
Yeah, when we build up to the big green dragon, you might go, "Oh, cute fairy." No, they're horrifying. The venom dragon. So and I actually really like this because despite being the dragon of life, so you would think, oh, well, they're like the big Gyran dragon, so they should be like really. No, they represent life in all its forms, which means that it's fucking horrifying, and they're said to be incredibly venomous within and without.
Yeah.
And they're mean. They're really fucking
mean. They almost view themselves as figures of rebirth, as in we're going to bring your death so that other things can come back and grow in your place. They are nasty motherfuckers.
Yeah, stay the fucking away from them. And they breathe a form of poisonous gas / venom that I don't care what armor you have, you're going to die.
Let me just bring up this one. No, Nurgle's much worse in almost every form. Remember, Nurgle is a chaos god, is not a force of nature. And one of the biggest mistakes people make with Nurgle is they think, oh, he's just about life and things growing. And no, he's about it all going wrong. He's cancerous. He is the worst, and he is falling to despair as it never properly comes to an end. This, instead, is a force of nature, a force where the natural cycle does come to an end and becomes something different in time. So this is very much a force that isn't chaos.
Next one is actually a really, really fun one, because they actually gave it a little bit more storyline than a lot of them, which is that we have the Storm Dragon.
Storm Dragons.
Which are quite rare. Because they're up there. They like to fly around the heavens. If you can't guess, they're very heavily associated with the Azir, and they're prone to flying around inside thunderstorms and just enjoying themselves. They're very they're almost kind of very much like whimsical. The thing that's actually funny about them is they actually bother explaining how their breath weapon works, because they breathe lightning. So instead of it, they breathe lightning, explains what actually happens is their scales build up electrical charges as they fly through lightning storms, and then they discharge it at you, which looks like they're breathing lightning.
Yeah,
which is just
these are basically your blue dragons, and they're often referred to in imperial records as blue dragons. It's not just the storm dragon, which is a really handy way of encoding it when you're viewing it purely from the Winds of Magic front. But you'll find that blue dragons spitting lightning is a standard trope in Warhammer from about 3rd edition onwards.
Yeah, and the Emperor class is the very, very creatively named Great Storm Dragon.
Not even Emperor Storm Dragon, just Great Storm Dragon.
I feel like they probably should have gone Blue Dragon to then Storm Dragon, and that would have felt a little more clever, like a step up. But yeah.
Or Celestial Dragon and Blue and Storm Dragon or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, you're right.
But they, the Great Storm Dragons are spooky. And the big reason they're spooky is they very much represent something I actually was hearing about from someone that died very tragically near me not too long ago, which is the idea of a bolt of lightning hitting out of the blue. Of like, you're just there doing whatever. And because a lot of people really underestimate how far away lightning can hit something. And oh boy, these guys are that brought into, they are the sudden wrath of the heavens, just shows up. And they're pretty mysterious. There's not a lot known about them, and they're not very well categorized, because they just kind of show up, destroy things, probably for some great reason, and then peace out.
Yep, sounds good.
That takes us to our last two big types that were introduced in the Monstrous Arcana. So one we're not going to go too crazy on, but we have the Warpfire Dragons, which are if you want to talk about a evil fucking dragon, Warpfire Dragons are evil motherfuckers.
Yeah.
They are so bad. One thing they did that I actually thought was very fun world building wise is that they're the only dragon introduced in this entire system that are, for lore reasons, not given an Emperor class.
Yeah, it's a funny one, because I think the answer here is almost loosely attached to what they are in the Warhammer world. Let's say segregated blocks, and they are basically Chaos Dragons. And Chaos Dragons are any of the dragons that have kind of fallen to Chaos. Warpfire Dragons kind of fall into that amount. They feed upon Warpstone, very common down in the southern pole, the good old Warpfire Dragons. And they are effectively Chaos Dragons, mutated heavily and often aligned with Chaos, although getting them on side is never as easy as you might think. They are extremely powerful, vindictive, terrible creatures, unlike many of the core Chaos Dragons that are just often enslaved, somehow taken control of, or alternatively being manipulated and used by various Chaos Sorcerers or something similar. And Chaos Dragons can come from all types of dragon. So everything we've said before can be a Chaos Dragon. In some respects, everything we said before can become a Warpfire Dragon also. So they almost don't need their own Emperor class, because they're basically every other type of dragon already. And they get towards an Emperor class merely by existing. But if you really wanted to go out there and make one, you just throw every Dar spell known to man, every piece of dark magic, and you're off there. And if you want to align them to a single Chaos power, you could very easily do so.
Yeah, they are... one of the things that's very interesting about them is they're notably horrible because they just radiate Warpstone. Yeah. They have just burning green fire that change. So anywhere they go, you could follow one very easily because its pathway would just be this horrible burned hellscape of mutating change. And they're addicts. They are.
Can I just drop on in this one from Man Like Pegasus. Difference between Warfire Dragon and Chaos Dragon is a Chaos Dragon has fallen to Chaos and is mutated. A Warfire Dragon eats Warpstone. It's a completely different thing.
Yeah, the Warfire Dragons are very much... The Warpstone is their core thing. Like, if you have a dragon that is obsessed with Warpstone and devours it like a genuine glutton, then you're dealing with a Warfire Dragon.
And you might be wondering, why would they do this? And we already have an answer for this from earlier in the stream. And the answer is that the dragons gain their anti-sleepiness, effectively, from the Winds of Magic. The Winds of Magic empower them and bring them back to wakefulness. And Warpstone is the purified form of the Winds of Magic in physical form. By eating it, they will stay permanently active. They will never fall to the slumber that very much plays all dragons, except for the very youngest ones. So eating Warpstone is a keen way to keep yourself going, which is why not necessarily all of them might be Chaos Dragons per se, but because Warpstone is so debilitating to both body and mind, they are pretty much guaranteed to fall to Chaos one way or another.
Yep. Some fun little things about them. Like Andy said, they are extremely active. They are vibrant. They are noted for being incredibly cruel, and they travel incredible distances to find Warpstone. One of the theories that's posited in the book that's very funny and also terrifying is that they are native to the Southern Chaos Space, because that's where most of the Warpstone in the world is. And it's said that there's a lot of hypothesizing. Why bother coming north? There's less Warpstone up in like the old world and stuff. So why do Warpstone dragons even come up here? And the answer that's posited, not confirmed, but posited, is that the mightiest and largest of the Warpfire dragons down in the Southern Chaos Waste are so massive, so horrible, that all of the other Warpfire dragons have to flee north or they'll be eaten and killed.
So basically, your choice is deal with the giant, huge nastiness that's down there, or deal with Skaven Blight. And they're like, Skaven Blight sounds easy by comparison. Let's go!
Which, if you ever get the Monsters Arcanum, the opening pages actually have a big storyline about a Warpfire dragon teaming up with Talayans, where the Talayans bargain with it, because it's very intelligent. And they bargain with it to basically say, hey, we need to kill Skaven. You can have all their Warpstone if you help us. And the dragon's like, all right.
Let me just bring up this comment just to clarify before we move on. Is Warpstone some matter equivalent to Dar then, not Chaos? Yes. Warpstone is not Chaos, but it results in lots of things that Chaos likes. For example, mutation. Warpstone is not Chaos big C. Chaos is the Chaos gods and everything they stand for, but it is a core component used by Chaos. It's basically just solidified dark magic and is horrific.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say about Warfire Dragons, just to impress upon you all how bullshit and terrifying they are, is that A, they're incredibly magical because they're literally dripping with Warpstone. Mm-hmm. B, they fucking regenerate. Their flesh is constantly putting itself back together. Once again, Warpstone. C, when they die, they have so much concentrated magic in their body, they explode. So it's like a Warpstone bomb goes off when one of them dies.
Yeah, good times.
Awful creatures.
Yeah,
and that
great.
takes us to our last dragon, which was introduced in Monsters Arcanum. And these guys are big. These are the big boys, which are the magma dragons.
Magmas.
The magma dragons are a true old world dragon. They're said to be native to the volcanoes of the Darklands. And these guys are big, heavily armored, which protects them from the heat. Because we know dragons don't really like that heat. They have this incredible heavy armor. They look quite different than most of the dragons in the Warhammer setting because they're so tanky. Like they look almost like a big bulldog. And they are basically our lava dragons. Dragons that love these deep volcanoes, and they are noted to be some of the most colossal of all dragons in the modern age.
They've also got a really interesting detail that they don't really go into, and that's that their armor is mostly made of, drumroll, obsidian, which means that, in truth, they're also immune to magic. Immune.
Yep.
Yeah, they can't cast it, which is interesting, because they're made of obsidian. But all the spells that could be used to hold them in place will mostly fail. This is not something that's really brought up, though, because these books are much more interested in, hey, we use big spells to bring these dragons into your control and use them in your army. But obsidian is the anti-magic material of the Warhammer world, which means that these dragons are terrifying in a way that most others aren't, because most magic items, when they go up to them, will fail. Dwarf runes will fail. This is a truly terrifying creature, and its genesis is never explained. So I'm really quite interested as to exactly where they come from.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing where instead of explaining where all the magma dragons come from, they use the entire story to talk about one. Which was created. It wasn't natural. The Chaos Dwarfs made it. Where they captured a big nasty fire dragon and they tried to basically Kadaify it. So they made enhancements to it and attempted to bind demons into it, and it broke free. And the Chaos Dwarfs went, oh shit. Because much of the Tower of Gorgoth got messed up, and the Chaos Dwarves have never been able to kill it. It got away, and the Chaos Dwarves live in genuine terror of the day it comes back for them.
Yeah, so that's them. They suck. I like them.
Yeah, they're great. Also, this is where we get something last thing I want to do for this before we jump into some more super chats, which is that we talked about Amdra the Dread earlier, and there's something cool to talk about her for a second. Was that Amdra the Dread is this big, awful nightmare dragon who's incredibly ancient, and like Andy was talking about, she's one of the only dragons that has appropriately sized artwork, where her artwork shows her in scale, and she is awesome. So big. It's actual like horror movie shit. Where
do you have a copy of it there? Because that'd be awesome.
Yes, I do. It's
because Amdra is fucking awesome.
Yeah, so Amdra the Dread, yeah, she is. When you notice how teeny tiny.
So this is, I'm going to state it as clearly as possible. This is one of the only examples we have of Warhammer art showing what the Emperor Dragons look like. Most Warhammer art prefers to show Emperor Dragons being about the size of a big dragon from the battle game. And indeed, the Emperor Dragon models they provide you are rarely much bigger than just a big Forge World model. They're not even as big as Titans. But the truth of it, there we go. Right, so there's that dragon. And look at all those tiny little
Chaos
spears.
Army.
Yeah.
This is the Chaos Army. That's Amdra.
Yeah. It's big, and that is an Emperor dragon.
There's one of her babies. There's like a good sized dragon.
There's like 2 or 3 of them flying in the air if you look above to the left hand side.
Yeah, like she is.
There's another one just flying there at the top of the screen. You can just see it. And there's like 5 dragons flying in that one. 5 dragons around Omra, her kids, and bluntly horrific sized entity. And yes, it can fly, because it's flying on the winds of death. They fly using magic as much as using actual empirical wings that are beating against the air. It is proper big.
So the reason I brought her up is that she's been there for a very, very long time. And the ancient kingdom of Strigos, so the people of the Strigoi, on the Magma Dragon page, which talks about these big, ancient, horrible dragons from like the Darklands and the Badlands where Strigos was. And Strigos, keep in mind, was ruled over by Caden for a long time, who was like apparently one of the greatest beast wizards to ever live. They have a prophecy about dragons. And it goes like this. As once was, all shall be again. Where they once ruled, they shall rule again. When older gods than ours wake to war, with the 4 great ruins as before, man, dwarf, elf, and beast shall be but tatters of their feast.
Yep,
from the right. Red Book of Strigos, which is great, and also is a prophecy in the end times we didn't get to see, which is a bummer.
Yeah, which is a bummer, because I love seeing that shit come to pass. It would have been another super cool thing to bring up for the end times. So that gives us broadly most of the vampires, most of the dragons. We're not diving into things like zombie dragons or I don't know, necrolith bone dragons or any of the undeady ones, because they are a very different breed and they almost need their own stream to discuss them, because they're basically ones that for one reason or another have been brought back, and that's one breed of dragon or another that has been brought back to life.
The only thing I'll say about the Nehekaran dragon is that just the nice thing about it is it's a different species.
Species.
Because of the crocodilian features, you can tell it's probably like a river dragon from ancient Nehekara. Cool.
Yep. And if you're out there going, these sound cool, I'd like to include them, maybe include others. Absolutely. The Warhammer world, this breakdown of dragons is only a fraction of the total number. What we can say from this breakdown, though, is really fascinating for dragons. And that is that before the Cataclysm, dragons were not so stringently different colored. But come the coming of the winds of magic and come the arrival of the Cataclysm and the Chaos Gods, the dragons, who were clearly susceptible to magic, started to change, and new ones that were born from eggs came out different colors according to where they were born, close to volcanoes and great wellings of actually in the mountains. This is very common, which is one of the reasons why most of the dragons are red, because they're very closely tied to the magma and the great chambers of superheated stone that so many of the dragons are relatively close to. But we also get gold dragons, much rarer, heavy metals, or our forest dragons when they're suffused with gyron. Plus, they cause physical changes in turn as well. So what it says about dragons is that they, as a species, are affected by magic in a way that you might not expect. And the Chaos Dwarves clearly tried to use that to their advantage and made the Magma Dragon. Now, as to whether they made all Magma Dragons, that's a thing that's up in the air.
It doesn't. It deliberately doesn't touch on that.
In the way that they didn't make green skins, but they definitely made black orcs. Is that the case for Magma Dragons? But the fact they're covered in obsidian really does suggest they probably did, because it's an anti-magic dragon, which is very much what dwarves are looking for, anti-magic stuff, because they're dwarfs. So there's loads of cool dragon types, and there is more that clearly haven't been discussed in Warhammer. Go wild when you're making your own versions.
Oh yeah, Nagarash. Dragons like to absorb magic and get changed by it. Vampires are very magic creatures, don't need to absorb more blood/magic when drinking a big enough one, kinda. What would happen if a dragon consumed a vampire? So
it would die.
Yeah, it would just die immediately.
And it would need to be resurrected using some ancient, terrible ritual, but that poor vampire's dead.
Yeah, I don't think the dragons would actually find... So if you're talking about like, okay, so a vampire could get really cool buffs from eating a dragon, could the reverse happen? No, because a vampire in scale to the dragon is just a small snack. It's just not a big enough deal.
But having said that, let's be honest, vampires are proper ridiculous in terms of their capabilities, and many dragons are actually potentially in trouble if they face off against some of the more powerful vampires, big time. But for the vast majority, it's just going to be dead time. But as we discussed in our Lorehammer episode, I can't believe this one's so relevant, but the Lorehammer episode just last Friday, there are lots of weird ways that you can avoid being eaten by a dragon, including one of the ones there, which I won't spoil, but it involved a very big stick.
Antonio Ranza, can a dragon also be among the 13? Oh, the Everchosens.
Probably not. The Everchosens are pretty much all human. That's what we know, except for one that's a dwarf, except for one that's a. So probably not, but that doesn't mean no.
If there was, he was probably, or it was probably terrifying as fuck.
Yeah, totally. And they would have probably won if the answer was yes.
Yeah, that's very true. Donovan, I wonder if the dragon language from Skyrim was inspired by Warhammer Old World dragons. I really doubt it. Parthenax seems to match the naming scheme quite well.
It doesn't just match really well, it matches to the point that either A, they're all drawing from similar styles of myths, and possibly that was it, or there was a little bit of cross-contamination there, because some of the dragon language names sound exactly like that. So I sort of agree with you there, Dynoman.
That's true. Like when I think Alduin and Parthenax and stuff, like those do match the Warhammer naming conventions.
It's really, really close. Now, that doesn't mean that there was any conscious transfer, but there may have been an unconscious one as people who were making it up and were influenced by the other things they'd seen in popular media, went for something that felt right, and it just so happened to also feel right when it matches up with the Warhammer names.
Scar6 Top Guy, I'm making a setting for TTRPG, but it's really close to Warhammer with new names. I wanted the expert's opinion on that kind of world building.
Go wild. I mean, I'm not sure.
Have fun with it.
Yeah, last Saturday there was some world building done as a live stream over on the Rookery, It's a proper sci-fi piece of crazy. I recommend watching it. Just type in Rookery Publications over in YouTube. It's proper crazy. But I think it gives you a really good idea of how world building doesn't need to be constrained in the way you might first think. It was a really good stream. So go check that from last Saturday if you want to see a different style of world building.
Yes. Parmesia, why dragons in general are hard to be understood and to be domesticated? Why can't the dragons get along with most of the other races?
Because they're bigger and better than everyone else. And they think it. I mean, it's almost as simple as that. It doesn't need to be more complicated. They're not stupid. They're really clever. And others hunt them down all the time. It's not just that they can't get on with others. Others do not get on with them. They see them as a challenge. Or like the dwarves, they just go out and kill them. They just bluntly kill them whenever they find them. So they're big, clever creatures that are hunted down. And what do? Young dragons are hungry. They've got things to eat, and people make for really good snacks.
Yeah, and I mean, especially when it comes to like domesticated, these aren't just like, most of them are not just like big dumb animals. They're very, very intelligent creatures. They're not just gonna like
I might ask you a more uncomfortable question. Why won't people just be domesticated? What's wrong with being a slave?
Yeah.
People don't want to be slaves. People push against that. They don't want to be domesticated.
And why don't they get along? I mean, so this is something I've talked a little bit about in the past, of that if you really think about it, especially when you're dealing with older dragons, every single one of the Warhammer races is an invasive species to them. Like greenskins, elves, dwarves, humans, chaos, all of it is stuff that was brought to their home by a literal alien force, or enhanced by an alien force, and took their home from them. Why would they be nice to them? We're all of those other warm-blooded races and even the lizardmen and all that stuff are literally just a horrible invasive parasite that is killing them.
Just noted someone posted a dragon miniature over in the minis part over in Discord, and it was the old Dragon Master's dragon, which is basically Elric on a dragon, and he just posted his painted miniature. So thanks very much for that one, Elric Kinslayer.
Liam, what for a 4th edition thing? My player wants to quench their staff/weapon in Carmine Dragon's blood. I don't know where you're going to find that, but okay. Any suggestion for the end result outside of the normal dragon blood quench if successful? It's their Gravedigger shovel.
I don't know how to answer that. I mean, what's the end you'd expect? They're going to get eaten. Yeah. Why is any dragon ever going to give their blood over to anything?
So let's assume that some random bullshit happens and they end up with a bucket of Carmine Dragon blood. If you were to quench a Gravedigger shovel staff/weapon into it, I mean, there would be more to, like, there'd be more steps. It wouldn't just, like, you couldn't just dip it in the blood, it just turns magic. It would be part of a complex process. But
you need someone who knew what they were doing.
Yeah, if you had a good wizard or a dwarf runesmith, or like an elven artificer on staff, and you went, hey, I've got like a thing of Carmine Dragon blood, they'd probably go, oh, I could do some cool shit with that.
Yeah, totally. And you probably tie it through to just the general winds of death stuff in general, and the crystalline nature of the Carmine Dragons. So pulling in purple crystals and doing something that does along that. You slam someone with your big Gravedigger shovel, and wherever it scunners them in the head, purple crystals form up and burst out where the blood is. It'd be horrible. Okay, so yeah, you could do something like that. That'd be fun.
Yep.
Sure.
Giri Geronison. In Hungarian myths, the Garabonsius, I'm so sorry. He is a mystic born with powers, but he learned his magic at school, opposed the shamanic Taltos, and he can ride a dragon, more of a serpent, I assume this means, and causes storms. What kind of wizard would he be? I mean, he sounds
Amber.
like yeah, that could work
Amber.
great.
Yeah, Amber probably. I mean, he's a shaman. He's got all the necessary components.
Oh, no, he opposed the shamans.
Oh, he opposed them. Oh, apologies. I mean,
he rides a dragon and he causes storms. Maybe a Zir wizard,
Celestial?
I guess. Yeah,
sure.
It says he studied at school. Yeah, so probably Celestial wizard.
Yeah, Celestial.
But more of like the elemental kind instead of the other one. Which go check out our ranking the lores of magic, or the colleges of magic stream, institutions of magic, whatever we call that shitting. Seth 45er. So how does Nehekara have flying crocodile dragons? Or did Cetra demand his own so that they glue wings on a crocodile and call it a dragon? They basically just expanded the setting.
Yeah,
they said
added another dragon type.
There are dragons native to that part of the world, and they're all gone
they
now.
look like this. Yeah.
Cool, great. That's how you do that. Christopher, thank you. I don't see a comment or anything, but appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Antonio Grimdeer, I am here to fuck you, Scaladrak. Dwarf, do you mean kill him? Grimdeer, I said what I said. Or no, that's what I said. Course correct.
Thanks, Antonio.
Hey, you know what? We don't. Maybe it was just that's how steamy the session was in the Black Mountains that it melted. Who's to say? Dino Man. So, dragon letting a magic user on their back is basically like a water buffalo with an oxpecker bird.
Yes, that could be. That doesn't mean it always is, but yeah, absolutely could be.
Kubaj, hail Lorebeards. A question about horses. Oh, horses. In real life, horses are very skittish, but in Warhammer, they're charging at giant monsters. Is this bravery perhaps due to some form of magic?
It's training. And they have to go through significant training for that. It's sort of covered in the rules here or there. There's the broken trait and there's the war trait that you get inside Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4, for example. So you have to break the horse first. That's still not going to stop it. You have to give it the war trait to mean that it will no longer shy away from all the monstrous creatures. But yes, in Warhammer, they are trained to do it. So you don't get the same issues that, say, for example, an elephant charge would bring for your average cavalryman, where they weren't trained to face elephants. So those cavalry just skited. But in the Warhammer world, you have to train them to do this, and it's selective breeding over multiple generations, meaning that Warhammer horses are just more up for it than the real world equivalents.
Yep.
And Chris, magic.
Magic does help. Chris 989. Admittedly, I don't like the idea of Kalador enslaving dragons instead of being an ancient alliance. Emmerich would be better if he didn't have Manathir be enslaved, in my opinion. But what are your reasons for this? So what I'll say is
it's what it is.
Yeah, it genuinely is, but relationships are also complicated. And just because Kalador initially enslaved the dragons doesn't mean that there hasn't been relationships that is the War of Vengeance trilogy. Go read
I'm gonna go simpler and say, look, slavery is bad, but the Romans all had slaves, and they built up lots of meaningful, real relationships with their slaves because they're people and they're sentient, and meaningful relationships can come from these. Does that in any way say the slavery of Rome is a good thing? No. Does that mean that all the people who were owning slaves were bad? No, that was their society. It's how it worked. Bad and good, such simple terms to try and judge an entire society like that are difficult. Should they be judged for it by modern standards? Absolutely. But when it comes to the dragons, high elves fucking suck and dark elves fucking suck because they're slave masters. Now, you might not like it, but that's what they are. They have enslaved the dragons. Now, the dragons and them might have brilliant relationships, but if the dragons weren't slaves, those relationships might not be what they are.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that it makes for very good storytelling. Of that, it's complex. It's a complicated relationship, and it also makes the world more interesting because the Cathayan dragons are looking at the High Elf dragons and being like, ugh.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the reasons why when I see various people, for example, shipping Miao Ying with Imrik, I'm like, oh, hell no. Never. Ever. Miao Ying would be so hard no on that because the High Elves suck. They're the worst. They feel pity for the Ulthuani dragons.
Yeah, and of course, to follow up with this, Chris, I think if you were to talk to most High Elves, they would vehemently deny the idea that they enslaved their dragons. They would be like, how
many?
Dare you? Well, yeah, many. The likes of Emmerich. Emmerich would be like, absolutely not. That's ridiculous. Like, Manathir is like my closest friend, yada, 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 yada.
Yeah, totally. And he is.
Yeah, and he is, but it's a product of a system.
Yes, and it's a system where that dragon doesn't actually have free will. They have the appearance of free will, but they don't because they are enslaved.
Yeah, and this does, to also put it in kind of a weird light as well, make them kind of better dragon riders, because an aspect of the dragon song is that when an elf binds to their dragon, they communicate psychically. They communicate instantly.
Which is, again, I didn't bring that up earlier when we were discussing the communication parts, because it's really for an Ulthwani dragon stream.
Yes, yeah,
but it's, again, one of those things that generally shows that the dragons are capable of telepathy. It seems to be a core component of dragons, and the other examples of dragons often have telepathy as a part of their process. For example, Ulthwani dragons telepathically link to their riders.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say, for the love of God, go read the War of Vengeance trilogy, because it does a beautiful job of examining an artifact that was used to bind the ancient dragons, and how elves, by the era of the War of Vengeance, which is a ways later, some of them are profoundly uncomfortable with its technique.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they have enslaved them. It is as simple as that. And later generations, when they realize what has happened, often go, well, that sucks. Well, you're going to lose them? No. Consider them a little bit like nuclear weapons. Now, I know this might sound ridiculous, but how many people are anti-nuclear weapon? Just the concept of it. They say, no nukes in our country or some equivalent. But the governments at hand say, yeah, we're not getting rid of them. Why? Because they work as a very good deterrent. They suck. They are absolutely the worst, but no matter how much they may morally object against them, they still don't get rid of them. And how much do they morally object against being enslavers of dragons? Some of them, a lot. But do they stop it? No, because they need them.
Theo, dragons are the wharf of big monsters.
Yes, they are. Yeah. And they are often used by various books to be the, I'm just taking out the dragon and thus I rock, and shows you how powerful that character is because they've killed a dragon, where often they forget how powerful dragons actually are.
Yeah, which actually you can play around with a lot of fun ways, because of, like, we talked about how, like, there's all these different ages ranges of dragons, where, like, a lot of those dragons that are, like, killed by that awesome human that's like, wow, I'm the best, I killed a dragon, like, he just killed a baby.
Marcus Wolfhart, for example, I killed another Emperor Dragon and another Emperor Dragon. Oh, another one! And you're like, seriously, Marcus? Do you realize what an Emperor Dragon actually is? What you're calling an Emperor Dragon is like a relatively short one.
Yeah, he does kill a nasty dragon. It's true, but yeah, calling it an Emperor Dragon is like, was it though?
Yeah.
Tyrant 25. What, if any, parts of the world don't have greenskin problem?
Probably none.
Southern Chaos Waste.
I mean, even there's probably greenskins popping up every once in a while. True. But how you determine what problem is, I think, is the bigger one. But greenskins are a worldwide issue. And it's more problematic in some parts than others.
Charles CK, are elves self-aware that they have enslaved dragons? A lot. Yes, most of them are.
Most of them are. Dark elves in particular are fully aware of what they're doing. Their beast masters treat them like beasts. As far as they're concerned, the dragons are there to serve them. This is pretty much the dark elf opinion on everything that's not a dark elf, though. Everything is there to serve them. The high elves, that is a more complicated situation where the vast majority just don't think about it too much. But if they look into the histories and they bother with their core tales, it's as black and white as it possibly can be. But the reality of it is that most of the dragons are just nice to them. Yeah. So they don't really think about it in any great way. Many of them don't, because to do so is uncomfortable. And it's very easy to fool oneself into thinking that something is okay when the thing that stands right in front of you and should be saying it's not okay goes, nah, it's cool. I love you guys. You guys rock.
Yeah. And I would very much say, so delude themselves over time thinking it's alliance/friendship thing. Does it vary? It varies. I would say, like, your Caledorians, so like the elves of Caledor, very much love that. They cast themselves in a very noble light, and we know the Caledorians are arrogant assholes, even by elf standards. Other elves are like, oh, those guys. They purely view it as like the great alliance friendship, because it makes them feel good and it makes them look good. But like your more educated historical elves that care less about image would go, well.
And again, to say it one more time, dragon tamer. Yeah. Caledor dragon tamer, not dragon friend.
Stephen Lucas. Now imagine ancient elves rode dragons more like crews defending a ship with ballistas and laser swords like Storm Ruler or the Moonlight Greatsword. It would make more sense.
That makes much more sense, Stephen. And obviously all the smaller dragons, the ones that are sitting to like 20, 30 meters or whatever, you can ride those really quite well with long lances and an equivalent and even fight from their backs. But if we're dealing with the bigger dragons, then yes, these are handled in the same way that the Dark Elves use dragons often at sea, where they're pulling their ships, or alternatively, they've built on the back of these dragons to take them out into the ocean. And some of these dragons can go underwater. The very towers are sealed so that the dragons could go down and come up at another place. And that is where the Dark Elves are, on the inside of these waterproof towers. So yes, they fight from the backs of dragons, and the Dark Elves are really the only remnant where we can see what was probably the Ulthwani way of fighting back in the past, which is dragons are weapon platforms.
Dumbo, not to derail you too much, but why are elves and dwarfs, should have an F, are so resistant to chaos corruption? Will be helpful info for Warhammer the Old World RPG I'm in.
Because they were designed to be so. And I know that sounds dumb, but that's what the old ones did. The species that they created during the before Cataclysm times, the pre-Cataclysm era, were in some respects definitely created for post-Cataclysm, because the old ones could see what was coming. So all of them are to a greater or lesser degree resistant to chaos. But I will now flip it up and say that perhaps you're looking at it wrong. They're not more resistant to chaos corruption. It's just that humans are extremely susceptible. So they're the norm. They're what people should be. Humans suck. They just fall to chaos. They mutate really easily. Humans are the worst. All of the other species, orcs, goblins, halflings, ogres, elves, dwarves, all of them resist chaos better than humans. It isn't an elf and dwarf are better problem. It's that humans are worse.
Yeah, that's actually extremely accurate.
Yeah.
Humans are so susceptible to chaos. It's sad.
Most of the great chaos horde is comprised of humans.
Yep. Cole Patterson, dragons are real, Sotek, don't let the wonder die. Oh, if only.
If only.
now I get on and read the news, and it's so much worse. I need to go back to believing dragons are real. Hey, Walker, more teeth money. And I asked Andy this yesterday. So, Sotek, what is your favorite aspect of Tolkien and his setting generally, and as it relates to Warhammer specifically? Okay, so what I like about Tolkien's setting in and of itself, like separated from Warhammer, is that it's something I sometimes criticize about it, but I like it when I'm enjoying it in the form of like a movie or whatever, is that the Tolkien setting, the fundamental idea of that the good guys will win in the end, it's inevitable, that like evil will fall, that's comforting and it's nice. And it's good to have those kinds of stories, like Superman.
Not something I prefer.
Yeah, it's not my usual preference for storytelling, but there are times where it's genuinely very, very nice, and I can see why people like it.
It is comforting, yeah.
It's
comfort food.
Yeah, as it relates to Warhammer, something that I like more about Tolkien, but I consider this relate to Warhammer, is that Tolkien, I think, was a absolute master of making a fictional setting feel like an actual place, like a living, breathing world with a unique history and languages and cultures that I could see myself visiting because it's so well designed, which Warhammer stole a lot of from all sorts of different settings, but it does apply to Warhammer.
Yep, that's good stuff. Like that. Thanks, E. Walker.
Yeah, thank you. Watchdog, which other colored dragon do you think would be the most interesting and terrifying? Oh, of the ones that like we didn't. That
I would really like to see a proper beast one, a proper
beast dragon would be so fucking cool.
Because the beast wind is terrifying in general, cold-hearted and bitter.
A shadow dragon is probably literal fucking nightmare fuel.
Yeah, that's a nasty one too.
Like,
a dragon. Nightmare dragon should be.
That's what the Nightmare Dragon should have been.
It's just nonsense. So many
just
Carmine could have just just leave Carmine over there with Actually. I mean, not Actually, pardon me, with Shyish. And bring Ulgu over for the Nightmare Dragon.
Yeah, because a proper Nightmare Dragon of Ulgu, I mean, that's a dragon that can literally alter your perception of reality. That is scary shit.
Yep. Absolutely terrifying, and is indeed something that has been deployed in Lorehammer already.
Ooh,
Not
spooky.
that it's immediately obvious.
That's the worst kind of news. Donovan 95, is the moon associated with shapeshifters because the non-chaos moon seems to shift shape in the sky with the different moon phases?
I mean, the answer to that is really the real world answer to that. And that is, in the real world, it's associated with all of this. Lunacy, the very word, comes from the idea that you go mad because of the moon. Lunacy. This is a real world phenomenon. And the answer is much more complicated than that alone. I suggest go checking into real world history, Dinoman. You'll get a far broader answer.
Yeah, real world will inform it. I will say this just maybe loud. I think you mean legally distinct.
Yeah, totally.
Sir.
Awkward.
Ricky Chapman, we did fight an Emperor Dragon, and by fight we had ogres, dwarves, and even a group of knights on Pegasus punch holes in the wings and drown it in the ocean.
Yeah, I've only I've dealt with Emperor Dragons in my games like 3 times, most recently with Lawhammer. And in every single instance, they were, as far as your average player was concerned, basically indestructible. Even an entire army going up against it would not be enough. With like 50, 60 channelers and spellcasters et al. Would not be enough for a true emperor. Big dragons, though, they've been brought down in almost exactly the way you're describing.
Yep. Poor thing just couldn't swim, apparently. JD, if not ice, what element would the Hiss dragons use? Just pure light? Crystals?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. All to the above. And they would probably be, especially after everything that happened, you'd probably find a lot of them down in the deserts. Fun enough.
And it's quite likely that their breath would basically be a laser beam. Okay, so it beams across a shining lightning light from their mouth, and it just beams across and slices and burns everything in its path. It would be a terrifying dragon, and the most intelligent and the most capable at magic. It would be horrific.
Yeah. Luckily, hopefully they'd be too busy like contemplating or just hanging out and not getting too involved in other affairs. JD, also, I wouldn't mind a Wednesday stream making the dragons of the other 4 winds, because dragons are cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Darius Rose, in terms of relationship between dragon and elf, how deep can it get? Say with Anarian and in Draupnir, was he perhaps closer than he was with any of his wives?
I mean, how deep can any relationship get? And yes, I think that the idea of them effectively being spouses would very much be the case for some. It's going to be personal, down to individuals. Some of the Caledonian dragon lords are going to view themselves as lords, as actual owners and controllers of the dragons. Others will see it as a deep personal relationship that is probably and possibly much deeper than any they will form with their own species. So it's going to be as variable as the individuals involved.
Yeah, Emmerich would probably be a pretty good example of, I would guess his relationship with a Manathir is significantly better than any elf.
Although Emmerich is a proud prick.
He is. He absolutely is. But I think it's because of the way he views himself as a dragon rather than an elf.
Yeah, I could also see it, though, that it is almost the exact opposite as well. Where it takes on the appearances of that, but he just thinks he's better.
Yeah. Yeah, he does call himself the Lord of Dragons.
Exactly. He's the Lord of Dragons. And when you look at many of the things he says, it makes a very dark, almost, character for his relationship with dragons.
Yeah. Yeah, Emmerich actually has a kind of fucked up quote, I think, about black dragons. I can't remember if it's... I want to say it's black dragons, where Emmerich has a quote that comes along the lines of something that all of the dark elf dragons need to... They're such... In his opinion, they're such abominations, they all need to be absolutely hunted down and completely exterminated. Like, they need to be genocided. Which, you could argue that he's not entirely wrong, but there have been some Dark Elf dragons that aren't completely crazy insane, like Seraphon. So, it's complicated. Pormesia, I wonder if has there been any dragon in Warhammer world in the evolutionary perspective that consumes spirits? Would be cool if so.
There's been no direct description of that. You'll find over in the Plane of Bone, which we're going to get to in a moment, there's a lot of undeady nonsense. And over there, it would make sense, but the undeady nonsense has been basically brought up and summarized with Nightmare Dragon that lives there, and can take on entire armies all by herself. So the answer to this is kind of no, but I agree, it would be cool.
Yeah, and that would be spooky.
Yeah.
Diamond, if there are dragons associated with lores of magic that aren't tied with the 8 winds, could there be a dragons associated with the Great Maw magic? Or does the weird way those lores interact with the winds of magic prevent that? Is a Squiggan or a Moggan possible?
No.
So,
no. The green Great Maw is not a wind of magic as we understand it, so dragons would thus not be attached to it. What they're doing with the Great Maw is, again, something really quite different, and also the magic they're using is often tied to, say, for example, Gur. So the lore of the Great Maw is not using the wind of Maw, which they can then bask in. They have to be able to bask in this particular area for potentially decades or centuries, and you can't bask in it there. It's just simply impossible. So the answer to this is no, but the answer is also, hey, I'm a writer and I feel like doing it, and at some point someone very well may.
Yeah, so what I would say is, so the Squiggan, Wah magic would not work with a dragon, but you could just have a type of squig that looks like a dragon and basically is a dragon, and everyone would go, yeah, sure, squigs, why not? But to the Moggan, keep in mind that, like, Zhao Ming has been next to the Great Maw for thousands of years, and it's only in the era of Karl Franz, it's only now just starting to get into his head so bad that it's messing with him, and it's, like, whispering to him and talking to him and perhaps corrupting him, but he's probably the only realistic case of that in the setting, and he can't cast Maw magic. It's just having an influence on him.
But I don't think there'd be a stupid story if someone
were, I could see like a very gluttonous.
You take yourself dragon eggs and you go place them in the maw. Okay, and then they hatch maybe 500 years later. They are not going to be like normal dragons. They're going to be hungry dragons. So I think that you could get yourself some sort of Morgan or equivalent, because there's a place to bask there, so to speak, but it's not because of the winds of magic per se. So the answer is absolutely not, but you could make individual stories where it could work.
Yeah, if you're just hell bent on having the big mouth dragon from Dark Souls 1, you could do that. You could absolutely do that if you wanted to.
Yeah, totally.
Theo, hello. Considering dragons are unadapted to their current environment, well, I said they've adapted thanks to magic, but how long does it take for them to grow? We don't know canonically. And how often are active ones killed? We don't really know canonically. How many dragons have been born since the Cataclysm? Don't know canonically.
This is a tough one to answer because there's loads of dragons if the background requires it. And you often find the great mothers or fathers of dragons are surrounded by lots of smaller dragons. Like, for example, the piece of art that we showed earlier with a great nightmare emperor dragon is surrounded with, like, there's a good 5 or 6 other smaller dragons kicking around in that scene. So have lots been born? The answer is yes. And there's dragon eggs popping up all over the place, but it's a realm in which they're no longer adapted. You're correct. So it often requires magic to bring the birth to effectively make that egg crack, and that magic that they're basking in often turns the dragon into something else when it comes out, a red dragon rather than the mother or father's particular breed. So you never can be certain what's going to happen. Actual numbers are as big or as little as the story at hand demands.
Yeah, that's a type of hard world building that Warhammer generally avoids.
Yeah, true fact.
Warmonger, Varanthax in AOS famous because the Varanthax is small, where Archaon gets his like super crazy bullshit from. Has the same structure as a Warpfire Dragon model. Food for thought. Yep, probably was just a big fucking Warpfire Dragon, considering that he's farming literal like Warpstone blood magma shit.
I'm very likely came from the Southern Plain. It makes sense.
Yeah. Giri Garanison, Dragon Riders could be air artillery. Yep.
Yes.
Yes, they absolutely could.
Yeah, definitely.
Ricky Chapman, could dragons use the transformation of Caden to take on a human form?
No.
No, because that's not what the spell does.
Yeah, that's not what the spell does at all. If it could do that, but I think the bigger question here, Ricky, would be: could they use a spell to take on human form? And the answer to that is probably, but it would probably be a much more powerful spell than you realize. In the same way that a human can turn into a mouse using certain beast lore spells, but it would come hand in hand with difficulties. It might make that dragon very susceptible to being killed, which means that most dragons would have zero interest in doing so.
Yep. Prometheus, what about sea dragons and their origin/types? So
exactly the same.
Yeah, they exist. They're in the ocean and they're well adapted to it, and they seem to be a pretty notable primordial species.
Indeed, and many of them have wings that you might not realize because they're not necessarily shown on the pictures, but they're often sitting under the water, and they're used to effectively like fins guide the dragon around. So they're still dragons as we understand them today. You just can't tell from the top half that is emerging from the waters. So yeah, they're probably related to dragons. They're probably just dragons of a different form. Dragons associated strongly with with Gyron, for example, with the great water running through them, or alternatively with some other form of watery magic.
Yeah, and there's a lot of offshoot species as well. Like you have your hell drakes, which don't have limbs; they're like big sea serpents. And then you've got sea serpents. You got merworms, which are all offshoots of the.
And are they the same species or are they not? And given how susceptible to change dragons appear to be, possibly.
Yep. Brindonlio, would the Empire's knowledge of dragons change if Teclis had stayed at the colleges instead of going back to Ulthuan to become the High Lore Master?
Entirely depends on whether Teclis told them anything.
Yeah, I imagine Teclis
elves don't.
Yeah, the elves probably would have very much preferred Teclis didn't. Granted, that might not have stopped him, but I don't see him doing that per se.
Yeah. No.
Hannibal, dragon versus Slan for the most strongest race on average. Casting
Strong
ability,
is an interesting word.
Yeah. Casting ability, probably the Slan. Literally anything else, dragons sweep pretty hard.
Yeah. A war between the dragon and the Slan, as in the Lizardmen, ended with the dragons losing. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah. Watchdog, do you think the old ones made their own dragons? They probably altered.
I mean, Ulthuani dragons are effectively an example of this, where the elves took control of the dragons, and that was to the old one's purpose.
Yeah, I would very much agree with Andy. Elf dragons are basically that.
Yeah.
Pormesia, old ones saw how powerful and horrific the dragons are. Why have they never thought about making a dragon familiar lizard monster to use it? They did. They're called Ulthuani dragons.
Yeah, they have them. Yeah.
Hound of Ill Omens. One of the most interesting things about the could it be an ever-chosen question is that it seems the gods only like relatively short-lived races. They like their ever-chosen to have an expiration date or want to buy more time.
I'm not sure that's true, Hound of Ill-Omen, and I'll use one obvious example for this, Archaon. Archaon was already freaking ancient when he became the Everchosen. He had extended his life far beyond standard mortal times. He is an old man by the time the world comes to an end, and then continues for uncounted tens of millennia. Forming up with chaos in many respects means that this aspect of being a human or anything else kind of becomes irrelevant as their pawns, almost as immortals, walk about from plane of existence to the next, destroying as required.
Yeah, I would probably rephrase that, Hound, to that you could argue part of why humans are so susceptible to chaos is because of their short life and they're so desperate to live longer. But I think
could be a good angle.
That's like over there.
Yeah, it's almost not quite the right angle, but yes, spot on.
Yeah. Watchdog 3079. What are the implications of a caster through Gur taking the shape of a dragon, and how would true dragons react?
So I think the first part of that is a world building discussion as to whether a dragon could ever be formed from Gur, which forms into mindless monsters. Effectively, anything that's mindless, that is an animal, is tied to Gur. Dragons aren't animals. That means that you'd be able to say, I can use Gur to turn into an elf. That's not right. That's not what Gur does. So the question here in the world building front is, are dragons something that Gur should allow you to change into? The answer is no, but writers forget this. Writers forget that dragons aren't monsters in the strictest sense of how Warhammer defines such things. They are hyper intelligent. Heish is within them. They are not Gur-related creatures. So I think the answer to this, if I was being as lore accurate as I could be, is there are no implications because it would fail. It just wouldn't work. And how other dragons would react is pretty simple. You tried and you failed. But let's say it did work, because that's ultimately what you're asking here. They would not be impressed.
Yeah, transformation of Caden is a very it's a wizard has to focus very hard to keep the spell up. It is a spell that is not permanent unless something really weird happens. But it's basically a wizard forcing their body to go through a metamorphosis where they become a big stompy monster like a hydra or dragon or whatever. But they're not a real one. Like it's still the mind of a person in a big monster body that is struggling to control it and use its full effectiveness, but a reel of whatever that species is would almost assuredly be able to tell the difference.
They aren't girly enough. That is a ridiculous joke.
Vermilion. Our entire nation's underground, Hollow Earth style. It could be very well the case. I wouldn't shock me.
The answer is yes. We have entire seas underground as well. If we go over and look at what's underneath the Dark Elf realms over Nagaroth, where there's an entire underworld thing going on. So are there other examples of that in Warhammer? The answer is almost certainly yes. The dark beneath the world is populated by all manner of subterranean horrendous creatures. And yeah, there's examples of this everywhere. As to what they are, because they're not really required by the Warhammer game, they're very rarely touched upon. So these troglodytic extra species are not really discussed.
For Warhammer Underworld stream in 100 years to show what was going on underground after the old world is dead. Yeah, who's to say? Charles Gray, recently been going through the Gotrek Felix audiobooks, and one of the books is suggested chaos-tainted orcs by the Sleeper. I thought orcs were chaos resistant or immune. Resistant, not immune.
Yeah, they're extremely resistant at that, but again, nothing is immune to the insidious nature of chaos. Everything can fall under the correct circumstances, arguably excluding the slan.
Yeah. Mickey Stopwatch, when you say created by the old ones when it comes to elves, humans, dwarves, is it more of an uplift? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, the old ones, as far as I've ever read, and everything I've ever read, they've never created from scratch anything.
Yeah, agreed. Uplift is the correct sense, although some of the species do believe they were created. Take, for example, the elves. They believe they were created by Isha, their goddess of fertility and life et al., and the mother of the elves. So do be aware that there are myths that stand contrary to this.
Guardian of the Rune. Could the Chaos Rift deep in the earth that Grimnir guards against be related to the ascension of Hashid Chaos God? Yes, we talked about that. Go watch the Astrogoth stream.
It was Astrogoth. I keep forgetting it's an Astrogoth stream, not a Astrogoth stream.
Astrogoth. Could Grimnir have taken an oath to slay Hashid? It's that I will say that would be a very dark storyline, but yeah, that could absolutely be
absolutely, particularly if they're brothers, or contrary to what some might expect, maybe even a sister. There's no need for Hashut to be male.
Yeah, or father and son, or father and daughter.
Yeah, there's lots of different potentials here. But kinslaying is a problem.
Yeah, but hey, that could explain why Grimnir's whole thing was so dramatic. Becoming the first Slayer.
He effectively becomes the first Slayer. Why? Very possibly because of this. And I think that Hashut being responsible for Grimnir's extraordinary oaths that will then echo down for all dwarfs in eternity, absolutely links. It's just a perfect choice.
That'd be the right kind of spice. That'd be the kind of spice we like.
It's just beautiful.
Especially like, oh man, the entire idea that like Grimnir's cultural effect would be based on an act of kinslaying would be like, Nathan Hall, if someone was an actual dragon friend or dragon cultist, are there any special benefits like blessings or mutations the dragon could bestow upon you? Also, as a really big Kobold fan, would you add them to Warhammer if you were forced to? Okay, so I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to tell you something you're not going to like, which is that technically there are kobolds, fire kobolds, which are just goblins.
They're goblins.
Yeah, they're goblins that have adapted to volcanic environments. So they're like red and they have some other weird stuff.
So special benefits and blessings, no, not really, but yeah, you could certainly make them. And would I add kobolds? No, I wouldn't, because Warhammer's already stolen enough from everybody else's properties. I'd like to maintain what it has and then build new, unique creations where possible. But you could definitely create your own blessings and mutations, but it doesn't quite match what dragons are. So I'd look to go down a different route.
Yeah, I would see more like they go through some form of ritual scarring that the dragon does to them as a form of like, being shown, and maybe it could have its own special benefits if the dragon casts a spell on them or whatever. I will note, if you were hell bent on making a form of kobold, so like you're like, I want a like lizard creature that worship dragons, I would say use the Dragon Isles. Make it where there's there's like some big dragon there, and those lizardman offshoots.
On that, we should stop because we're getting really close to time.
Yes.
We've got one other location that we need to discuss, which is the Plane of Bone. Now, there's not a lot to discuss here, but what there is to discuss is important for dragons in the old world specifically. And the Plane of Bone lies on the other side of the world's edge. Now, the world's edge may sound like a weird name, given that it's actually the world's spine, but it's an old world name, okay, where the old world ends at the world's edge. If you look at the older histories, the Teutigans believe that they named it the world's edge when they crossed over it. So the old founders of the empire, one of the old tribes, believe they're the ones that named it the world's edge. And on the other side, there's an enormous area called the Plane of Bone. And it's directly related to dragons, because before the cataclysm, before the chaos gods came and destroyed the world, as many view it, the great graveyard of the dragons was the Plane of Bone. And when dragons felt that time coming upon them when they were going to die, they flew over to the Plane of Bones and laid their heads down to rest eternally. The Plane of Bone, however, when the cataclysm occurred, became something quite different, as the entire area became awash with Shyish, the Wind of Death. And the arise of the Wind of Death and also Dar and lots of dark pockets changed that entire place. Now, the Plane of Bone, let's get scale here. Some of the dragon skulls there are enormous in a way that you might not realize. The eye socket is the size of a house alone. They are truly enormous ancient dragons, and also lots of smaller ones as well. And this entire area effectively falls to what will become amethyst dragons and those who attempt to utilize that area for their own benefit. For example, Nagash travels here and summons his first zombie dragons from this area. So what we have is a giant dragon's graveyard. And what's also worth noting, just as another small tiny detail, is if we hike south just a little bit and cross over some water, you arrive at the Dragon Isles. Dragon Isles that we know have some lizardman population of an atavistic backward type, but very possibly are also related to dragons in a way that we haven't really had any proper detail of. I'm only dropping it because they're very close to each other, and it is always worth noting that they're there. But beyond that, the Plane of Bone is just this great big scary place that even the Chaos Dwarves are terrified of, because as we mentioned before, it has a nightmare dragon at its very heart that is bluntly the size of a city and will kill anything that comes too close that it doesn't like.
Yeah, and the thing that's really fascinating about the Plane of Bone is it tapping into that sort of almost culture. Like you could put it as instinct, but based on how intelligent the dragons are, it almost feels more like a cultural thing, where when it's their time to die, it's an elephant graveyard functionally. They travel across the world to rest here, which is really cool because obviously we don't have a lot about it from the dragon's perspective. It's kind of just played as an instinctual thing, but you could play it as it's a religious thing, not religious in the sense of like worshiping a god, but that it's this cultural path that must be walked when your life is near its end, which is super cool.
Super cool. And it also speaks to the change that was wrought to the world when the cataclysm occurred, because after this, not only does it no longer happen, they don't go there anymore, but you get an idea that the dragons are no longer mortal, in that they don't die of old age. It just doesn't happen anymore. Instead, age brings size, and size does not bring death. Instead, they sleep, no longer capable of energizing themselves in the way they once did, because they're now closer to the sun and the heat just doesn't get along with them. But with the onrush of magic sweeping across the world, it's almost like the magic itself keeps them alive and keeps them going. There is no need for a dragon graveyard anymore. The only time a dragon dies is when they're brought down in violence. And that seems to be the only way they die nowadays in Warhammer. Previously, beforehand, they were long-lived, and sometimes to the case of thousands of years. That's what it used to be before the cataclysm. But after the cataclysm, they appear to be, because of the onrush of magic, entirely immortal. In some respects, the elves may be suffering in a similar way. We have no way to know it. Before the cataclysm, they might have been a far shorter-lived species, but they, by their very nature, the way that their bodies work, it seems that they will and can subsist off magic. There's multiple examples of stories of elves that lie just asleep for hundreds of years, not stirring, sustained by magic alone, and then waking up and going, "Hi, everyone," and them going, "Wait a minute, I thought you were dead, Grandad. What the hell's going on?
We spent so much money on your funeral."
Yeah, we were about to ship you into a cave. What the hell's going on here? Something happened with the cataclysm, and some species of the Warhammer world were permanently changed. The dragons appear to be one of those, but it is the loosest of hints. And that hint is that culturally, dragons as a species, wherever they came across the world, gathered here. And the plane of bone is freaking huge. I mean, it's big. Warhammer world big. It's not just 100 miles across, it's hundreds and hundreds of miles across. And it is filled with this enormous dragon graveyard. And it's not the site of an ancient battle. This isn't one of those Warhammer stories where they go, "And billions of dragons died, their corpses are there still. Oh, it's terrible." No, this was once a place of peace. It no longer is. With the forming of the cataclysm, it became a place of horror. But it once was a place of peace. And the arrival of the old ones changes this as it becomes an end point of war for many. The wounded dragons from the war that drop down and die here. It's fun.
Yep, good old ones just fucking up everything they get close to. Elemental exposure. I can call myself a lion tamer all I want, but it doesn't change the fact that my cat is really the one in charge.
Yeah, you can. Except Dragon Tamer succeeded.
Yeah. Phil 5991. Were the dragons and old ones doomed to become foes? I thought they'd rather deal with dragons than dragon ogres. So not all of them fought. There were some dragons that were able to deal with the old ones. There's a dragon from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd Edition who has a whole speech about that. Apparently he assisted the old ones in their labor. Dragons are individuals. There are going to be some that were like, okay, I'm on board with this. There were some that were broken, some that were fled, some that hid, and some that died. But I think trying to apply like a banner to all dragons is pointless.
Yep.
From Eggman. So how terrifying would it be walking around and hearing in your head a dragon say, "I can smell you"? Maybe you get zapped or something after. Yeah, it would be bad.
Yep.
Real bad.
Yeah.
Hopefully if it's talking to you, it's more in I'm curious and might let you live sense, and less of a I'm gonna play with you like you're like I'm a cat, you're a mouse sense.
Again, most recent episodes of Lorehammer.
Yeah.
Just
is there any Skaven and dragon interactions? Yeah, bad. Skaven try to kill dragons sometimes. Warpfire dragons hunt Skaven because they know the Skaven have warp stone, and the Skaven are really fucking scared of them.
And rightly so.
Yeah. So
they're often crossing.
Yeah. Ricky Chapman. It was a true Emperor Dragon. We just didn't mention the 300 cannons, long rifles, grudge throws, and 5 iron blasters shooting at it. A lot of people died. That sounds on
300 cannons. That's a lot.
Yeah, that sounds a little more appropriate. Jaunty Scarecrow. How common are dragons in Lustria? Virtually non-existent.
Yeah, the dragons of Lustria have long been wiped out by the Lizardmen.
Yeah. Are they chased out by Lizardmen like everything else, or Dreadsaurians? So there's actually a really fun note if you read through the Lizardmen lore about the Carnosaurs and the Dreadsaurians, which is that it basically says that they were apex predators that killed the dragons in their part of the world. And if you think about it, the old Warhammer world, you had the big ice sheets and the equatorial band. The big dinosaur species were the dominant species in the equatorial band, but the dragons dominated what was outside of that.
Indeed, and there's a reason for that, because when they moved down to those hotter areas, the dragons just went to sleep. It made it very easy for the far smaller creatures that there were to kill them. The dragons were dominated the colder parts of the world.
Yeah, so like environmentally, bad for dragons. All those fucking giant ass trees that are hard to fly through, bad for dragons. And most of the Carnosaurs and Dreadsaurians, they might not look it because of like, especially Dreadsaurian, how fucking huge it is. They're ambush predators, most of them.
Yeah. Surprise Carnosaur.
Yeah, they're surprise Carnosaurs, which are the worst kind. Formicia, do we have a reptilian type of dragon in Warhammer, like human-sized, but draconic face? those are Saurus.
Saurus.
There are.
Yeah.
We're not aware of any literally take a dragon and make it the size of a man creature.
No, but we do have Saurus. We've got lizardmen. They don't really need another one. We've got snake men. We've got various troglodytic creatures in various parts of the New World. But broadly speaking,
I'll put it this way.
they don't need more.
If you slap the wings on a Saurus, I would go,
It's a dragon.
that's a dragon man. And you can say, oh, it's a blessed spawning. And I go, okay.
And particularly when you take a look at the cold ones as well. And cold ones in some of their previous descriptions have been called, cousins to dragons.
Yes,
and if you put wings on a cold one, it would look like a little dragon.
Yeah. And Strigoi Boy. And, oh, wow, we're actually doing great on time. Though we still got to do the outro. Strigoi Boy, don't dwarfs innately hate dragons? I don't. Innately is hard to say because the dwarves will give you reasons, but that doesn't necessarily mean there was originally a reason. It could have been that they were made for it, like me and Andy hypothesized. But the dwarves will tell you that, oh well, in our ancient things, the dragons were our first enemies. That when we tried to expand completely legally, they got mad about us encroaching on their space and they killed us. So fuck them. They got grudges.
Legally. I'm sure that makes a huge difference to the dead dragons.
Yeah. Whereas
my
the
lawyer says I'm allowed to move in here.
Yeah. The dwarves are out there being like eminent domain. But how did Grimnir feel about Kaldor's dragon title Dragon Tamer? I imagine Grimnir was probably not particularly impressed by that aspect of Kaldor.
Kaldor was in a completely different part of the world.
They did meet.
Doing different stuff.
They did meet each other.
It's like, who cares?
Yeah.
What they use titles for.
Yeah, Grimnir, I mean, based on what little lore we have about them, their conversation was very brief, and it was much more focused on, wow, this chaos shit sucks, right? And them being like, yeah, it does. And then chatting about that for probably like 30 minutes. They exchanged some gifts and peaced out. Who has time to worry about dragons when chaos is everywhere,
Yeah.
And then Bifocal King. Could there be a story where the Nightmare Dragon was there at the Plane of Bone to die, but then the Cataclysm happened and she didn't? Yes. So instead, that is a great idea.
Yeah, I don't think that's just a great idea. That's pretty much probably what I would do. That ancient dragon was there to die and didn't.
Ooh, that's cool. I like that. That plays Andro in a very unique light. All right, outro time.
Are we done already? Wow, okay. So, dragons. Old World dragons. Old World dragons, Ulthuani dragons, are different. And I think this stream pretty much gives you a description as to why. And there's one difference, and it is enforced by one act. And that is the fact that the dragons of Ulthuan are tamed. They are tamed. And that means that they might come across as best friends, but they are still tamed. When we move over to the Old World, they are not. They are entirely free, which means some of them are mean. Some of them are potentially friendly. The vast majority of them, however, are not. The dragons of the Old World are not the same as the dragons that once dominated the world as a whole. If we go back to pre-Cataclysm times, dragons ruled the world and fought for it. Great, enormous dragons that were the kings and queens of the world that was before the Old Ones came. And then when the Old Ones arrived, they slaughtered this particular species, leaving very few of them left alive. Pockets of resistance lay underground, others hid in other places. And then the Cataclysm came, and with that came magic. And magic changed the dragons forever. They are a species that prefers cold. That is where they're at their strongest. But the Old Ones shifted the Warhammer world close to the sun, meaning that not only was it easier for them to destroy them because they were depowered and made sleepy, it was also a preferential place for the Old Ones themselves, who liked things hot. But with the arrival of magic, the sleepiness of the dragons became controllable. It became something that they could somehow circumnavigate. They could get around what was their natural state. In warmth comes sleepiness. The sun comes out, the dragon goes to sleep. The sun goes away, the dragon comes out. But now they had magic. And with magic, the dragons of the Old World changed. And they changed for one primary reason. The writers decided that dragons were directly linked to the winds of magic. And over the course of the editions, what was originally just lots of cool different types of dragon in the Warhammer world turned into dragons change in magic. And it all begins to make sense when you take a look at all the disparate bits of lore that discuss the dragons. It's quite clear that the cold that they prefer has been replaced with high concentrations of magic, which is where dragons will often gather. It's not that it feeds them. They don't eat it. It just energizes them in the same way that the sun energizes humans. We are energized by the sun. Without the sun, we tend to go a bit ill and weird. Dragons need their magic to keep going in the Warhammer world because the world for them is too hot, too out of control. And some dragons have taken this to a very extreme place where they have become almost embodiments of heat to escape from the dangers of the heat. And some of them have been changed. For example, the Chaos Dwarves and what they did with the Magma Dragons. Several thousand years after the Cataclysm, what we have is a world full of much smaller dragons than we ever had before. Most of these dragons are rarely more than 10 to 20 meters in length. Most of them are very rideable, should they ever allow anyone to ride them, whether that is because a deal is made or magic is used to force them into taking a rider. And that is something that happens much more often than I think the dragons would prefer. Hence, they tend to avoid society as a whole, unless they are indeed themselves young and too stupid to realize that stealing sheep from the local farmland is going to bring a Bretonian knight not long after to try and free them from this. But as the dragon ages and gets bigger and stronger and hopefully less stupid, it can also take on other traits. We've discussed that they're probably, in time, telepathic. Not only are they probably telepathic, they're also probably very magical, because as they gain more and more power and age, the magic that they half subsist on begins to manifest around them. And as they speak, they can do spells. Now, is this reflected in the Warhammer game? Usually not. They leave it to the oldest, most powerful dragons so that they don't need to worry about putting them on the tabletop. Because if you make all the dragons on the tabletop capable of doing magic, they become too expensive to use in the standard game. They just do. So most of the dragons you find in the standard game are young dragons. Dragons who have yet to achieve their capability. But in the real world, Warhammer world, all dragons of a certain age, once they pass their equivalent of puberty, are broadly capable of magic. But they will have to learn, study, or somehow pick that up, and that could take centuries. And almost all dragons are intelligent, magic capable, and immensely powerful, which is why the descriptions of them quite clearly state that most dragons are capable of taking on armies. This isn't a boast. This isn't one of those hyperbolic statements that are dropped by writers because they think it's cool. In Warhammer, dragons are capable of taking on armies by themselves. And the biggest dragons, the dragons that existed before the Cataclysm that's still somehow alive, are of such immensity, such size, that they are capable of taking on not just armies, but entire invasions by themselves, which means that they are a constant, perpetual threat to everything. Fortunately, though, depending on whether you view such things as fortunate, there appears to be a species of dragon killers in the Warhammer world. And they have been working hard to destroy every dragon they find. And what is this species? It's the dwarfs. Now, a lot of people don't think of dwarfs as especially Dragon Slayer-esque, but if you look at their background in every edition of the game, they are the ones who have killed the most dragons by some measure. Not only that, their initial runes, the first runes that they learned from their ancestor gods, the Axe of Grimnir itself, are inscribed with runes of dragon slaying. It appears that dragon slaying is a core purpose of the dwarfs as far as the old ones are concerned. And dragon slaying is something they're very good at. So the threat of the great old emperor dragons that are the size of mountain ranges, so ridiculous are they, is mostly a threat from the past. Not only because they have been killed by dwarves in their enormity, not only because the great war from the Cataclysm as the Lizardmen did their genocide across the world and wiped out most of them, but the last part, which is they're just too tired. Most of them are asleep. They don't wake up, and when they do wake up, they are in extreme danger, because if they move, the Dragon Slayers come. And that Dragon Slayer could be the next ever chosen that needs to take down a dragon to prove that they are capable of doing so. It could be a next dwarf Dragon Slayer who's desperate to kill the big threat that he sees. They don't want to show themselves. And that means that, fortunately for the Warhammer game, they never really need to worry about the truly enormous dragons too often, but they are in the lore. And a perfect example of that is the picture that Sotek showed us halfway through the stream, where he showed us just how big those dragons get. Remember that picture where you got a dragon taking up approximately a third of the page, and all the tiny little spearmen and chaos dwarves et al. Rushing towards it, and they are the close ones. If you go down the hill, they get smaller, and as you get closer to the dragon, smaller yet. Its eye is several times the size of a single man. And then you've got the rest of the enormity of the dragon. It is huge. So they are left to myth. They are left to stories. You don't see them on the battlefield. And for me, that is one of the biggest shames of Warhammer, because we had a game for this called Warmaster. And Warmaster should have had giant fuck off dragons, but it didn't, because they just literally didn't support that game enough. So we ended up with tiny dragons and Warmaster only. But if you're out there thinking, how can I use dragons? The answer is in almost any way, because they're small and they're big. They're stupid and they're hyper intelligent. They take on all the winds of magic, yet sometimes just ignore them completely. You can do almost anything with a dragon in the Warhammer world and match the lore as it stands. They are a deeply mutable species that you can use in lots of different ways. And the old world examples of them are, I think, in many respects, an almost perfect example of what Warhammer offers, which is everything you already know and love from fantasy, but with all manner of cool extra shit added on top, as they then go, well, if we had these dragons, what would happen in a world saturated with magic? And the answer is, the dragons have changed.
Yes, and this is the horrible moment where I was like, oh, we're doing so great on time. And then it occurred to me that there were 3 dragons I was supposed to talk about. And
so let's do them quickly.
Forgot. We're going to knock them out really, really fast. So 3 named dragons that you can look up for just your own homework, and we'll just kind of cover them really fast. We've got the super famous, very funnily, Graug the Terrible. Totally not Smaug, but we've got Graug the Terrible. Very fun dragon. He was just a nasty piece of work that took over Kanak Azgal after it had fallen. So it fell first. Then he basically showed up and discovered all of its riches, which was really cool, because one of the big things was that the dwarves hid all of their riches behind runic wards. He sniffed it out anyway. He broke through all the dwarf wards, broke through all their obfuscation, took all the treasure, built up a big treasure hoard, and was basically unstoppable until this little dwarf snuck in and killed him while he was asleep.
Cheat.
Yeah, he cheated. The dwarf cheated and killed him while he was asleep. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stood a chance. So that's Graug the Terrible. You can look him up. There's some really cool artwork of him being killed by, like, I think it's Snorri something. But
generally is.
Yeah. You also have the big bad of all. So of the modern old world dragons, besides Andra the Dread, the biggest, baddest one nowadays is Skaladrak Incarnadin, who is believed by the dwarves to be the daughter of the OG Skaladrak that fought Grimnir. Skaladrak Incarnadin basically wakes up once every few centuries, and the dwarfs get their shit pushed in every time. She has destroyed entire holds. She's wiped out entire dwarf throngs, and they've never been able to kill her. Even by the time of the end time, she's still alive. Yep. And if you go back and watch our stream on Slayers, we talk a bit about the Slayer King. The original Slayer King of Kanak-Adrin was a result of Skaladrak Incarnadin.
Yep.
Like, she is terrifying. Yep. Last one, which is actually a really fun example. So we talked about the big Doomfire dragons, the big dragons of Akshi. The most famous one is Skullix the Great. Skullix the Great actually got a mini produced by Forge World that came out with 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy. Very cool model, very big.
Yeah, nice one.
Skullix was a very fun example because he lives up in Norska. He lives in the mountains of Norska. He's not a Chaos Dragon, but a Chaos Lord came to him and basically managed to forge a pact with him and bind him to his cause. So he said, hey, you're going to come fight with me? And Skullix said, all right, fine. and Skolex joins the Chaos Horde, comes down for the siege of Volkanov, kicks ass. But once that guy, what's his face, the Crimson Reaver, I can't remember his name, but once he died, Skolex said, "All right, deal's up," and just peaced out. He had no allegiance to Chaos. He didn't give a shit about Chaos. He showed up to fulfill basically the bargain he had made, and then he immediately left once the Pact-D was deceased.
That everything you want to cover? I mean, there's loads of dragons. There's tons you could do.
we those are the three big ones that are worth just kind of mentioning that have shown up a lot in more modern stuff. We could probably talk about them for like another 30 minutes, but
because there's tons. But we're at the end. We've got a few last super chats. Let's get those over and done with.
Yeah, you can look them up yourself for the rest of it. Sorcerer friend, you can justify non-spellcasters riding large dragons. Is that creatures like elves, Grove Knights, Chaos Lords, etc., are agile enough to move around and attack off various parts of the dragon? Hilarious, probably not, but hilarious.
I think the previous example we use it as a weapons platform might be a slightly better option than just simply having someone running around on his back going, "Get off, go on."
It's very funny to imagine.
You need to hook yourself on somehow. Or as he dives, you just fall off. I'll keep you on the back.
Like, Warhammer Fantasy is a ridiculous setting, but you do still generally have to deal with gravity.
Deal with it hard.
Yeah. It's very funny to imagine some elf running around like a lice on the back of some dragon trying to stab people as it gets close.
Like that.
Federico, could you elaborate very briefly on the relationship between gnomes and the Famir with dragons before and after the Cataclysm?
There's not much to say here.
Yeah, there's unfortunately, so there's nothing written.
Yeah, I mean, anything I'd say, Federico, would be a made-up answer, which is an extrapolation of what little we know about the gnomes and the Fimir. And dragons. So thus gnomes, they live in their burrows, which don't burrow anywhere near as deep as the dwarves. So they pretty much don't have any relationship with dragons under normal circumstances other than, well, I don't want to be dealing with them dragons, no. And then you've got the Fimir, who are out in the marshes and the bogs, which is not classic dragon territory, although there are some types of dragon you might find out there. And again, they're going to largely be ignoring them under most circumstances or trying to bind them to their will, just like any other species. But it's not specifically a relationship that they have. It's just the same as everyone else's.
Yeah, the most interesting thing, which we don't have any notes on, would have been like the ancient Famir pre-Cataclysm or pre-Old Ones and like what their relationship with the ancient dragon empires was. But we don't have anything written. So one
presumes, given how tiny they are, they were probably just avoiding them.
Yep. And that is it.
Is it?
So thank you all so much for joining us. We hope you had fun. Dragons are great. Dragons are so fun.
Dragons are super fun. Next week on next Sunday's episode of Lorebeards, we are going to be diving into a vaguely related topic. A topic that at least that may not be quite as old as the dragons you might expect, but you'd be wrong, because we're dealing with Morathi, the Hag Queen herself, the most powerful sorceress in the world. Some would definitely claim that, including Morathi herself. But the founder of more than you might realize, not just for the Dark Elves, but for elves as a whole. And a woman who predates the Cataclysm. So we have someone of extraordinary importance over the Sotek's channels next Sunday.
Yeah. Also, Nurka Durka, thank you very much for the. Never got to catch Stream Live. Well, thanks for making it right at the end. We appreciate it.
That was brilliant.
Just catching the end of the stream today. I will watch the rest of it. I want to say thanks for all you do, Sotek and Andy. Have a great Sunday.
Thank you so much, Arda.
Appreciate it. So, Morathi next week is going to be very interesting. There will probably be a lot of fascinating stories, some controversial takes. It should be a good time. And
it's going to be a controversial take, trust me.
Yeah, we are going to figure out what we're doing this Wednesday. We don't know yet.
Just after the stream, so we'll be posting about that very soon.
Yeah, and there will be a poll for the next Sunday on the Lawhammer channel.
The Lawhammer channels over on YouTube. So make sure you pop over to YouTube after this stream in about half an hour or so. We'll have a poll up for what we're going to be doing over on Sotek's channel the week after that.
Yeah.
Yes. I think. Or is it on your channel for the week after that? Or is it? There's going to be a poll
Whatever,
up somewhere.
yeah.
Trust me. I just suddenly realized. No, I think it's actually over on your channel. The next one.
Yes,
Maybe. I think it is because Marathi was over on my one, wasn't it? Wasn't it? For who knows?
I don't know.
Lost
We'll
track.
figure it out.
You're going to find the polls posted soon.
All right. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Let's go before we say anything else wrong. It's been great to chat to you. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.